demonstrated their weakness when he found they were less we are no longer capable of such thinking.
Well, you're actually saying that you need some
What's up, y'all? What's up? Let's go. Check out the live oaks from the Vaporwave Swamp. Okay, let's go. Let's get it popping here. What's up? Happy Sunday afternoon. Today we got a big one. Big stream to cover here because this is on Southern Gothic. And I'm going to try and cover not as much as I can, but a few important works here. I've got a huge list of works to cover. And so, yes, I am going to cover some Flannery O'Connor. That she kind of deserves her own stream. All this kind of deserves its own stream, but I'm going to try and get it going here. Let me give you the list of what I'm going to cover first because we got quite a lot here. I got a bunch of stuff to cover. Let me take these out. So, what's up, y'all? First of all, thank you. Please like and share. I hope everyone's having a good Sunday afternoon. Coming to you from the South here, and don't worry, there's going to be plenty of accent work in this one. But let me just go through some things I'm going to cover here. So, first of all, I'm going to do. I've already done a deep dive into William Faulkner's The Wild Palms, but I'm going to discuss this again. The Wild Palms and the Old Man. And then I've got parts of Harold Bloom's Genius. And then Harold Bloom's The Western Canon, which is somewhere in here. Got parts on Faulkner on the Western Canon and what he calls the American Religion. It's Harold Bloom. And then William Faulkner's ABSALOM. And then this book, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, which I read yesterday in about 2 hours. But we're going to do a deep dive into that. And then we're also going to do, let's see, Everything That Rises Must Converge, which is a short story by Flannery O'Connor. A Worn Path by the great Eudora Welty. Ambrose Bierce's An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. That's a short story. I'm just going to talk about that kind of in parallel with the rest of this. And then a few movies to talk about. We've got Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte with Bette Davis, which is a Southern Gothic film. The Gift. Cold Mountain. Black Snake Moan. I'm going to discuss parts of True Detective. And then, of course, Cape Fear and Poe. So there's a lot to cover here. I've still got another stack of books right here. But there's a lot to cover with this. So where should we begin? Well, I guess we can begin with Faulkner because when we talk about Southern Gothic, what we mean essentially is this is obviously a purely American genre, right? And also shouts out to Jonathan because Jonathan a long time ago sponsored a stream, and one of the things he asked me to do was Gone with the Wind. So this is going to discuss Gone with the Wind in relation to this because at the antebellum South plays a role in Southern Gothic because this is what the genre is, basically. So prior to the War of Northern Aggression, prior to the Civil War, we have a whole genre of literature and films that are made post. Obviously, these are sort of mid-20th century films that harken back to this sort of antebellum South time. And Gone with the Wind is a great example of that. Okay. But what happens is with the collapse of the South, and especially Reconstruction, there is a vacuum. There's a kind of vacuum that occurs in terms of power structure, culture, literature, living life, and it's much bigger than I can sort of find the words to describe right here. But what Southern Gothic does is it takes all of the elements of a kind of Romanesque version of the South. So when we think of Romantic and the Romantic period, in especially England, what it means is essentially that we have the medieval architectural structures, and then we have the hierarchy in society, and then as a result of really not as a result of the Enlightenment, but becoming post-Enlightenment, what happens is that a lot of those physical structures will crumble just like they did in Rome with the collapse of Rome. And so Romantic is Romanesque. It's a hearkening back to the structures of Rome, but with a kind of beauty in decay. And I've talked about this before in relation to Rome, in relation to Roman literature, films based in Rome, and especially Lord Byron. We did a couple streams on Byron early on in the channel. And Byron, the Byronic hero, and the landscapes that are inherent in Byron's lyric poems kind of play a part in the way that we see society. And this is a great example of the fact that art does not necessarily come as a result of changes in culture. It can influence those things, and in times there can be a sort of synthesis where the two things are sort of symbiotic. They're working off one another. And so Southern Gothic literature really begins with Poe, really begins with Edgar Allan Poe, whom Harold Bloom says is a terrible writer, but who is important. I don't agree, but I see what he's talking about, and who sort of sets the stage for the South as a kind of neo-Europe. It has Western European aesthetics, especially Parisian, and then eventually, of course, the Anglo influence is great in the South, but with tales of the arabesque, right? Things will become arabesque, decayed, phantasmagorical, and so Southern Gothic is really about looking at society and a way of dealing with the way that society has changed. This is especially important in Flannery O'Connor's short story. Very short. A short story is a genre. It's not just a story that is short. I know you know that, but we're talking about a specific genre of literature. But her really brief story, her stories are packed with meaning. And that short story is a great example of dealing with what was called the New South. Okay, now that we're in postmodernism, Great Reset era, it's ironic because that sort of reflects what she's talking about in the short story, which is that things change and one has to come to terms with it and make their way through this sort of new world, where all of a sudden some of the values are changing, and especially the aesthetics. And so one of the big things with Southern Gothic is that, especially with William Faulkner, because William Faulkner is really what the stream is about. And even though we're going to be discussing other works and books and movies, they cannot really exist in talking about anything Southern or in Southern Gothic without an unconscious understanding of William Faulkner. His work is so important in Western literature and especially in prose that any writer, especially a prose writer, any novelist writing today, especially a Southern writer, has William Faulkner's sort of cadences and the way that he writes ingrained in the writing without even knowing about it. It's the same thing that, we just did a stream. I just did a stream on James Joyce and William Butler Yeats, and it's sort of the same thing with those two writers in writing in English, but in Anglo-Irish literature, especially if you're writing the long novel. I mean, I've been looking at, if anyone wants me to do, here's one. If anyone wants me to do Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, this one I'm going to have to get a sponsored stream for because I'm not going to cover it without that. But if anybody wants me to do Gravity's Rainbow, that's a great example of postmodern literature that sort of has a Joycean and a Faulknerian influence in it. And so this is it's pretty dense stuff, pretty high IQ. And one of the things that is interesting is that the family structure is so important in the Southern Gothic genre because we'll see in the movie Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte that the family exists as a microcosm of society, but the way that the family crumbles is a sort of symbol and simulacra of the way that for instance, the plantation house is crumbling, or the grounds are crumbling, or society is crumbling on the outside. And especially in 19th century literature with the loss of the Civil War, and then eventually carpetbaggers and the invasion and the economic influences will make that certainly so. That's right, the War of Northern Aggression down there on the river. Listen, there's going to be a whole lot of. Listen, they call me Big Jim Bocephus Beauregard, former colonel, and why must the live oaks be crumbling down there on the river? Charlotte, why are you with that boy? So first, I suppose, just to take you through a couple of passages here in William Faulkner's The Wild Palms. So again, as a recap, just before I begin to talk about to give specific instances of literature with my kind of thesis statement here with my stream. Again, as a recap, Southern Gothic literature is about the crumbling of the family, the crumbling of society, microcosm and macrocosm, symbol and simulacra, and the way that virtue and values must be held through the crumbling, through the sort of tribulation. And what we also find is that um, one of the things that characters are constantly kind of conveying through literature, especially in Faulkner, is that the the verdict of the loss of the war seems to be, to many of the characters in the books, an instance of divine judgment, because a good man is hard to find, because there seem to be few people individually that hold up the virtuous outer notions that they were showing. Now, this is just in the literature. It's not necessarily whether I agree or not. But in terms of art, that is certainly what it's showing. And Absalom is a great example of this. So one of the things in the Wild Palms again, this is probably my favorite Faulkner, and it's a book of it's kind of entwined stories. This and the Old Man. The Old Man is about an old man who escapes from prison, then he rescues someone, and then he gets back. He's in, because the Delta is flooded, and then he gets back, and then he finds that his sentence has been increased from the time that he spent escaping, even though he finds a sense of virtue, and that's important. The idea of the flooding of the Delta is really important, especially in Mississippi specifically is where it is, because one thing I'm not discussing here is "O Brother, Where Art Thou," which has certainly a Southern Gothic overtones to it, and that, of course, is just a retelling of Homer's. That's of Homer's Odyssey, right? A kind of neo-American Southern folk version of Homer's Odyssey, and so the phantasmagorical elements are especially important, right? Because characters will come across ghosts, soothsayers, fortune tellers, and and it really becomes a sort of a cult with esoteric overtones in terms of trying to make their way through life, and that is why Harold Bloom really says that William Faulkner is a kind of proto-Gnostic writer in the ultimate sense, and this is again part of what Harold Bloom calls the American religion. We've discussed this so much in terms of Herman Melville and Moby Dick, right? That was the whole thesis for that for that stream. But what he says is that the American religion, or the American religion of literature, which he's talking about in his books. Harold Bloom, especially in the book Genius, he lays out his paradigm for literature in terms of the Sephiroth. He does that because he says that the American religion and the American religion of literature is essentially Gnostic. Now, how could you disprove that? I mean, because look, we've seen every movie that we go through, almost every movie, and many of the books that we've talked about end up being Gnostic. Right, so he says that the American religion. I don't agree. I mean, I agree with his assessment, but I don't agree with the paradigm. But what I'm saying is that that the American religion is a sort of combination of Gnosticism, folkism, and Pentecostalism. Right, it's a kind of emotional charisma. Right, it's charismatic and intent on the individual making their way through life, through society, and on a spiritual quest. So what he says here in the Wild Palms is important. He says on page, so you guys remember when I got this? I got this when I was in Mississippi last year, I guess maybe at Christmas time, and I'll be going down there soon again. So if you want to support me, you can do that through the links in the video description. You can drop super chats, donor chats. I will read those at the end. You can also grab a membership. We just did a membership stream. And that was fun. That was on Silent Night, Deadly Night, and the antithesis to Home Alone. So I've done 3 member streams, and as we keep going and keep building, we'll do more, and I will do more personal work with things that I've actually written instead of just critical analysis of other works. So this says, it's not the romance of illicit love which draws them, not the passionate idea of two damned and doomed and isolated forever against the world and God and the irrevocable which draws men. It's because the idea of illicit love is a challenge to them, because they have an irresistible desire to and an unshakable belief that they can, as they all believe, they can successfully conduct a boarding house, take the illicit love and make it respectable. Take Lothario himself and trim the very incorrigible bachelor's ringlets which snared them into the seemly decorum of Monday's hash and suburban trains. So what this is talking about is how in the Wild Palms we have two characters who have this illicit love affair, and the wife or the woman goes to get an abortion, and we see their suffering as a result of this. But it's because they believe that they could change the course of their lives through a kind of fatalistic intent. He says on page 71 here, he says, listen, it's got to be all honeymoon and always, forever and ever, until one of us dies. It can't be anything else. Either heaven or hell, no comfortable, safe, peaceful purgatory between for you and me to wait until good behavior or forbearance or shame or repentance overtakes us. So it's not me you believe in, put trust in. It's love, she looked at him, not just me, any man. Yes, it's love. They say love dies between two people. That's wrong. It doesn't die. It just leaves you, goes away. If you're not good enough, worthy enough, it doesn't die. You're the one that dies. It's like the ocean. If you're no good, if you can begin to make a bad smell in it, it just spews you up somewhere to die. You die anyway, but I'd rather drown in the ocean than be yerped up onto a strip of dead beach and be dried away by the sun into a little foul smear with no name to it. Just this was for an epitaph. Get up. I told the man we would move in today. So do you see how Gnostic that is? But also what he's talking about here is that this is a kind of also a restatement of Alfred Lord Tennyson, right? 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. And this passage in the book is often cited during times of grief, right? But notice how it's better to have. This is pure Southern Gothic. This is not only a romantic mind in terms of love, but a hearkening back to a better time and seeing the structures of beauty, but now they're crumbling, but still finding a kind of terrible beauty in those things. This is a great book. I mean, there are Falstaffian and quixotic quotes throughout. He says, she worked with dense and concentrated fury. A Quixote with a gaunt and dreamy, uncoordinated face, a Falstaff with a worn face of syphilitic barber and gross with meat, a single figure, yet when looked at, he seemed to see two, the man in the gross flesh, like a huge bear, and its fragile, consumptive keeper. This is also inherent in Southern Gothic literature. We have the crumbling of the body structure, the corpus, and yet there's this holding on. I think the precursor to this would be, and I see a lot of this in Southern Gothic literature, and especially in movies like Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, which is like this sort of Dickensian zeitgeist, this spirit of the age, this way of having characters who have everything or had everything in the past, and they want to maintain the old order, but in the present time they're crumbling and they're dying. And it makes it uncomfortable, and they end up sort of decaying in solitude until there's a reckoning. On page 133 here, it says, look down upon a world turned to furious motion and incredible retrograde. That's an amazing sentence. Sometime about midnight, accompanied by a rolling cannonade of thunder and lightning like a battery going into action, as though some 40 hours constipation of the elements, the firmament itself were discharging and clapping and glaring salute to the ultimate acquiescence to desperate and furious motion, and still leading its charging welter of dead cows and mules and outhouses and cabins and hen coops. The skiff passed Vicksburg, and the convict didn't know it. So we see also language of wartime, right? This sort of ambiance of wartime. On the next page, it reminded me of Rimbaud's The Drunken Boat. Then a hard, icy wind filled with the smell and taste and sense of wet and boundless desolation blew upon him. The skiff made one long, bounding lunge as the convict's native state, in its final paroxysm, regurgitated him onto the wild bosom of the Father of Waters. That's very much Rambodian. It's the Drunken Boat, which I should go through sometime. It's one of the great poems. And so next, I want to take you into what Harold Bloom says about Faulkner. And this is again from his book Genius, which is just a kind of collection of essays. But this has been one of my major books over the past few years. I first read this in 2015. This time, 2015, so about 8 years ago. William Faulkner, he says, Faulkner was a humanist and not a believer, though this has been obscured by neo-Christian critics. I've been to Faulkner's Roanoke many times. If you ever go down to Oxford, Mississippi, make sure you stop by Roanoke. It's fabulous. It's a wonderful place. And it's right there by the university, right there by Ole Miss. Of course, I have sort of two connections to Faulkner because of Mississippi, and then, of course, because he taught at UVA here in Virginia for a number of years. And the other day, I saw one of my old friends from school posted something, and it was a story about how an old astronomy teacher that I had just retired, or he retired a while back, but he's an old fella. But he had still run he like has something to do with the marathon here, and he was one of the track coaches, I guess. But it was on the news, and he showed a picture of, of course he still speaks like one of these characters, and he said, and you'll notice someone else in the picture there. You'll see that I'm just a young fella. I'm just a young wahoo-wah there at the University of Virginia, Mr. Jefferson's University. And you notice in the background there someone quite famous at the time. That's Mr. William Faulkner. He was timing my event. He was the timekeeper. I thought that was crazy. He's got a framed picture of it. It's pretty cool. That shows you how old this guy is, right? No, that's cool, though. But he says, I know that Faulkner attended the Episcopal Church in Mississippi, but for the purposes of this, here's what it says. It says, it seems best to characterize, I won't speak in that accent because that's not how Harold Bloom talks. It seems best to characterize Faulkner, the novelist, as a natural Gnostic, he says, though he was not immersed in the ancient heresy. He was always a knower and not a literary intellectual. Gnostics necessarily are not secular humanists like Herman Melville, who was aware of his own Gnosticism. They have a quarrel with the God of the Hebrew Bible and the Gospel of Mark. Faulkner's quarrel in Go Down Moses and afterwards was also with the God of Southern history. A God, he says, white patriarchs fathering children upon their black concubines was the authentic essence of Southern culture, he says here, for Faulkner's works. And Faulkner's imaginative apprehension of the world that this produced is without rival. Now, that certainly plays a part in ABSALOM, and is one of the undercurrents of Southern Gothic literature. So all the time, what you have is the order of things, and then there's an undercurrent or a subversive order that is threatening to rot both sides of the new order in terms of the New South. That is definitely plays a part in the O'Connor story, and also in Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. So it says, Faulkner is incontestably the major North American novelist since Henry James, his antithesis. Yes, he is. Yes. I listen, I don't know if you guys have read Henry James. I cannot read Henry James. I just cannot find anything to grasp onto. I mean, I've read Henry James, and I study Henry James, especially in grad school, but I just cannot find anything visceral that I love about literature in terms of Henry James. I read it almost cold, in a cold fashion. Though also a kind of semi-ancestor through the Jamesian effect of Conrad. No other 20th century novelist so definitively joins the great sequence of Hawthorne, Melville, Mark Twain, and Henry James, and yet Faulkner despite both his national and international influence, stands apart from even his American tradition. He does. To define this solitude is difficult, though that makes Light in August an even more useful book for my prime purpose here, which is to isolate Faulkner's daemon, his genius, his demon in terms of his genius. The other self that constituted his genius. Though fascinated by the Bible, Faulkner subverts it constantly, almost as if something in his genius hopes that truth can be separated out and away from the powerful stories that are the Bible's literary glory. But he says, though it will be anything but a pastoral novel, the book begins and ends with, this is about Light in August, with Lena Grove, who for Faulkner invoked the imagery of Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn, though I suspect he had the harvest girl of Keats's To Autumn more in mind. In search of his faithless lover, the wandering Lena will be the light in August after her baby is born, but she experiences no anxiety in this narrative that otherwise is a cauldron of anxieties, almost as much as a process as she is a person. Lena is patient, calm, hopeful, serene, and replete with delight and wonder at whatever she sees on her trek. It has been suggested that Lena is a fallen Eve, the mother of all living, but that is too large an identification. Lena Grove is interesting because she may be the only woman in Faulkner who does not frighten or appall her creator. I take it that she is Faulkner's palinode, his self-critique of all those visions of women that rightfully render feminist critics uneasy. She and Byron Bunch, who falls in love with her and doubtless eventually will marry her, are the only characters in Light in August who need not wait for their dooms to lift. They emerge from the most wholesome element in Faulkner's comedy, an awareness that kindness can prevail, but only for certain favored persons. Never confused or frightened, free of societal stigmas, Lena wanders through Light in August like a charmed force, curiously inviolable. Though she will have little to do with the central plot of the book, the agony of Joe Christmas, Faulkner has had the aesthetic intuition that she could make the rest of the novel bearable to us. He says he first read Light in August half a century ago. His copy is inscribed March 15th, 1951, Ithaca, New York. He inscribes books exactly the same way I do. And have just reread it for the first time in about a decade. I confess to curiosity as to whether the tragedy of Joe Christmas would hold up in the United States of 2001, because this is when the book was published, rather than of 1932, the year of its publication. He goes on to say, he goes on to say, I'm impressed to learn that 80% of African Americans do not accept the legitimacy of W, and he says he also does not, and of their honorable intentions is a mark that much is unchanged. So that's interesting that he questions the legitimacy of certain things, right? Which would be difficult to say now. Of all Faulkner's, I mean, which is true now, obviously, but is, you know what I'm saying. I'm trying to be careful here. He says, let's see. Much as I admire Conrad elsewhere, in Nostromo, Victory, Under Western Eyes, The Secret Agent, I fear that there is nothing to understand in the life or death of Kurtz, since Conrad himself does not seem to understand. That's an astute point. That's incredible, because although we spend all of Heart of Darkness with this unreliable narrator who finally confronts Kurtz, he's sane, but his soul is mad. So it's hard for a person, and we're learning about Kurtz through the words and the vision of Marlowe in Heart of Darkness. It's very safe. I mean, it's very uncomfortable to learn that when you finally meet this character at the end of the novel, at the end of the novella, it's almost impossible to understand who he truly is, because even though we talk about empathy now, he's a character above us. Remember in Apocalypse Now, that version of Kurtz says, he broke from them and then he broke from himself. I've never seen a man so broken up and ripped apart. He says, I'm above your lying, petty morality, right? Which is almost a sort of Gnostic demiurge character. He says, but the murder and castration of Joe Christmas has too many significances rather than too few. Christmas has scapegoated himself before anyone else victimizes him, and he has no idea whatever or of what he means or possibly believes. He is a pure representation of what Freud called the death drive, but so is Joanna Burton, and Percy Grimm is death itself. It does not matter, of course, whether Joe Christmas is partly black or not, the book's madness, accurately reflecting the madness of our society, is that the suspicion is enough. Faulkner is justified in emphasizing the serenity and triumphalism of Joe's final ordeal because its memorability is totally fused with the books and the nation's madness. The genius of William Faulkner was fused also both with the malaise and with the art that proved almost adequate to it, almost only because it is the antithesis of art. Crazy. That's an incredible insight into Faulkner. The other part here is, again, I'll just rehash quickly what he says about the American religion. That might be in the other book. Hold on a second. Oh yeah. He says at the end of the Herman Melville passage, which is incredible here. He's talking about Emerson and the transparent eyeball. Okay, so here's the part about the American. Here's the part about the American religion. He says, Captain, this is on to Melville, just a side note here. Captain Ahab is the American Prometheus. If you want to see this, you can go back and watch my full analysis of Moby Dick and Luciferian monomania in Moby Dick. Captain Ahab is the American Prometheus and not the American Adam. A rugged spirit, both attracted and repelled by Emerson, Melville haunted Emerson's lectures and scribbled fierce marginalia in Emerson's essays. Their affinities outweighed their differences, and the proper answering voice to Moby Dick comes in Emerson's Dark, The Conduct of Life. One might say that Melville reads Emerson rather as Ahab would, seeking out the earliest Emerson, the Orphic adept who is a Gnostic, not an idealist. There you go. But Moby Dick is dedicated to the genius of Hawthorne, whom Melville loved, and the dedication implicitly declares, "This is my genius. Ahab is my Hester, my vision of the heroic American." It's certainly the most extraordinary of such visions to date, outsoaring its strongest descendants. Thomas Sutpen in Faulkner's ABSALOM, which we're about to get to, and Judge Holden in McCarthy's Blood Meridian. Go to my Blood Meridian stream. Ahab is hero-villain, like Macbeth and Hamlet, rather than a genius of villainy, like Iago and Edmund and King Lear. I've done all of those plays. And yet Ahab, again, like Hamlet, is a genius. He's the genius or demon of his nation. The United States does not have a single national epic, but an amalgam of three very diverse works, Moby Dick, Leaves of Grass, and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Ahab is not someone we love, Walt and Huck are, but the awesome Ahab, rightly admired for his greatness by Ishmael and the common reader, joins Milton's Satan and Shakespeare's Falstaff in alienating scholars, old style and new. W.H. Auden, as a Christian critic, disapproved of Ahab. His whole life, in fact, is one of taking up defiantly a cross he is not required to take up, says Auden. One gathers that Ahab ought to have played Job, but as Stubbs says, Ahab's Ahab. Auden is very temperate compared to a papist critic's dismissal of the American captain. The world of his acts is strident, assertive, full of repudiation and destruction. Is that not true of Hamlet, Lear, Othello, and Macbeth? And then he goes on to say, he says, Ahab is the American as ungodly, godlike man. Indeed, he is, with Emerson, Joseph Smith, and William James, one of the founders of the American religion, he says, our acknowledged blend of Gnosticism, enthusiasm, and Orphism. What is best and oldest in us is not part of the creation, but goes back to the primal abyss, our forefather and foremother. The chorus that denounces Ahab when it does not neglect his Gnosticism deplores it as an ancient heresy or as a romantic one. I've argued elsewhere in The American Religion, 1992, that from 1800 on, the United States has called itself Protestant while actually following one variant of Gnosis or another. In this neglected long poem of 1876, Clairol, Melville prophesied a crucial development in the American religion, currently manifested in our Pentecostals. There you go. That's it. That's Harold Bloom on what is the American religion. And my point in telling you this is, again, this provides a sort of paradigm for understanding the works that we've read so much of, and that is certainly inherent in Southern Gothic literature, even though that was mainly about a kind of New England Gothic, right? Okay, next, let's look at some of ABSALOM. This is a pretty difficult work. It's dense and thick. And so I'll just say that one of the okay, so what the book is about is essentially there's a guy named Thomas Sootpen, and he has um, come out of nowhere into Mississippi. He came from Virginia, but he was raised poor in sort of Western Virginia, and then ends up in Mississippi. And he comes in with this retinue of all these slaves and all these people that are working for him. And he starts buying up land, and his intention is basically to buy a property and build it from the ground up. It's kind of like this weird neo-Gnostic Eden again, and then we get the story told through various people. It's non-linear, it's episodic at times, non-linear, and it's really brilliant in the fact that we think that each time we read a version of the story, it's not cheap. It's not like you would watch a movie now and you see something happen and then you see it from another character's perspective. It's not like that. It's sort of all intertwined in surrealistic kind of pre-surrealistic dreamlike language. But his purpose is to show you that memory lives in the actions of those living. So it in a way, it doesn't matter like what color the horse cart was when it comes up. It's the overall actions, and it's the fact that it made an impact on the people there. And so eventually what happens is Thomas Lippin has this family, and then he let's see, his son shoots and kills his sister's husband or fiance right before the wedding. He goes off. Sutpin follows him to New Orleans, and then we find out that he has fathered a child with a black woman there, and then eventually we go back to his place in Mississippi, and then the whole place crumbles to the ground into nothing. It collapses in a kind of like Gotterdammerung. So, and that's like a very brief analysis of what happened, but of what happens in the book. But that's not really the purpose of the book. The plot sort of gets overwhelmed by the language because the sentences are so long. They're not run-on sentences. They are long, dreamlike, compound, complex sentences without punctuation because there's no punctuation in the mind of the speaker in the novel, if that makes sense. So he says, for instance, on page 15, he says, and there's also parts of Clytemnestra and some of the Greek plays within this that play a part. So it's kind of mirroring a past prologue, right? It's mirroring something ancient. Again, it's Greek in this rather than Romanesque, right? Rather than Roman. But even the Roman qualities, I saw a meme the other day and it was like Greeks watching Romans redo their entire civilization, claiming it's theirs, right? Which is, trite, but it's funny. It's a meme. So he says, needless of folly of adults, an air Cassandra-like and humorless and profoundly and sternly prophetic out of all the proportion to the actual years, even of a child who had never been young, because I was born too late. I was born 22 years too late. A child to whom out of the overheard talk of adults, my own sisters and my sisters' faces had come to be like the faces of an ogre tale between supper and bed, long before I was old enough or big enough to be permitted to play with them, yet to whom that sister must have to turn at the last when she lay dying, with one of the children vanished and doomed to be a murderer and the other doomed to be a widow before she'd even been a bride, and say, protect her at least save Judith, a child, yet whose child's vouchsafed instinct could make that reply with the mature wisdom of her elders apparently could not make. Protect her from whom and from what? He's already given them life. He does not need to harm them further. It's from themselves that they need protection. And that is Southern Gothic. That's the essence of the Southern Gothic genre, right? Oftentimes it's the destruction of the characters themselves. There's a great word here on page 57, renegadory. Great word. Let's see. There's a great one on page 74, Scythian glitter. So on page 68 here it says, because that's what a Southern lady is. Not the fact that penniless and with no prospect of ever being otherwise, and knowing that all who know her know this, yet moving with a parasol and a private chamber pot and 3 trunks into your home and into the room where your wife used the hand-embroidered linen, and not only takes command of all the servants who likewise know that she will never tip them, because they know as well as the white folks that she will never have anything to tip them with, but goes into the kitchen and dispossesses the cook and seasons the very food you're going to eat to suit her own palate. It's not this that she is depending on to keep her body and soul together. It's though she were living on the actual blood itself like a vampire, not with insatiability, certainly not with veracity, but with that serene and idle splendor of flowers arrogating to herself, because it fills her veins also, nourishment from the old blood that crossed uncharted seas and continents and battled wilderness hardships and lurking circumstances and fatalities with tranquil disregard of whatever onerous carks to leisure and even peace which the preservation of it incurs upon, might be called the contemporary transmutable fountainhead, and contrives to keep the crass food-bearing corpuscles sufficiently numerous and healthy in the stream. That's what she would have been expected to do, but she didn't. So do you love the unity and variety here? We have these long sentences. They're long because because time is slow in the South, because the weather and the climate, and because especially when Faulkner's writing, or the time about which he's writing, which is like 19th century, the people are few and far between. I told you that, my uncle's next door neighbor is Morgan Freeman, but he lives like 2 miles away, but he's his next door neighbor. That's the next land plot over, right? And you drive through the Delta and you drive forever and ever, and it's long and it's, it's kind of rolling, but it's not mountainous. It's just flat, like the contours in the earth. And then, there's this big sky above you, not big sky like you get in Montana or something, but big sky like it's reflecting the Delta and the river over it. And then it's just time. There's time, and it's just there's this like great breathing, and so all of the sentences are supposed to reflect that. That's form plus content equals meaning. And then finally, unity and variety. You get all that, and then you have this short 3-word sentence. But she didn't, right? Sentence fragment. Because even I love the craftsmanship, right? Because they're fragmented. Because the family is fragmented, because their souls are fragmented. And that paragraph right there, which is great, it's shown to us in a kind of, contour of life, as Jack Kerouac says. It's shown to us in this like long, rolling, almost pseudo-biblical language. That is actually conveyed in a much tighter sense in Flannery O'Connor's short story, Everything That Rises Must Converge, because we see all those details inherent in the mother in that short story. But this is, again, something constant. This always occurs in all of Southern Gothic literature. There's a lot of focus on the women in a sort of neo-Shakespearean sense. And Faulkner gets this. And what this means, anybody who's from the South will know this, right? Manners come second to, they're sort of an attempted replacement, not a replacement, but a substitute in a way for the lack of virtue that one encounters in society. So it's the manners that keep us, the sort of fabric of society stitched together. It's not the the legal decrees or the written, law codes, or, the political influence. It's the inherent, it's supposed to be virtue, right? But when that is lacking, it becomes the simple act of manners. And so the characters, especially of the old world, rely on this because there's a clear hierarchy, but they know. And so when that gets subverted, we see the crumbling of buildings. It's like in Poe's Fall of the House of Usher, which is a great example of this, because the House of Usher, and I'm not talking about the TV show, which is all over the place, all over Poe. I get what they're doing, but it's that's not worth it for me. In the short story, in the Fall of the Fall of the House of Usher, there's a giant chasm that opens up in the middle of the house till the house crumbles, right? Till it divides and crumbles. And that's because it's an outer symbol, it's an exterior symbol of the character's inner state, right? How families are broken apart through various means, but because the fabric becomes unstitched. Um, Page 74, my favorite phrase in this whole book. I just a lot of times if there's nothing, look, if there's nothing to when you're reading, this isn't advice. This is just me being a book lover to other people who may struggle with reading. If you struggle, whatever. If you are if there's one thing to grasp onto in a book, especially one that you're having difficulty with, just try and find the visceral, beautiful phrases, words or phrases that stand out to you. If you can remember one sentence or one paragraph or even one phrase or one line or one word that you got from a book, then you've taken more from the book than most people who I don't want to say than most people who read because most people probably don't read, but you're taking more in a meaningful sense into your soul than for instance, like when you were in school and you were forced to read, right? There's few people get anything out of that other than the sort of rote learning that you're supposed to do to make you through society. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm saying that's part of what you're supposed to do, right? In the rigidity of early academia, if it were in the best sense. But learning one word, right, from a book is incredible, and will in a weird way will give you a sense of the entire meaning of the book, right? It's kind of like for me, it's kind of like inscribing your book, right? It's like when you give a book to a person. If Christmas is coming up, if you give a book to your dad or something, right? Make sure that you inscribe the book. Put a note right on the frontispiece or on the title page. Right, write a note and sign it. Sign your name and put the date because it imprints it on your soul. Right, you'll always remember the words that you wrote because you never do that. It's a once in a year thing or a once in a lifetime thing, and they'll remember it. I remember every book that my dad's ever given me. Well, I remember that already, but like the books when he inscribed, I remember exactly what the notes say. Right, I remember when a friend gives me a book, and I remember the inscriptions that I put in books in terms of where I like when I read this when I looked at the beginning of this genius book and I wrote my initials. I wrote 12/30/15, Thanksgiving and Christmas 2015. So I remember exactly what I was doing in that time. I remember where I was when I read it. I remember what I was thinking. And that's because you are actively, this is active reading. This is what active reading is. That's why I inscribe my books. That's why I annotate them. That's why I'm actively using my brain to do something back and not just receiving information. So on page 74, you can take all that or leave it, whatever you think. I'm just, saying what I do. Page 74, he says Scythian glitter. God, what a great word. So again, when I hear the word Scythian, I think of Herodotus. It's mentioned in Herodotus, and I think of it makes me think of Frisian because there's a part in Beowulf where he's talking to the Frisians, and even though there's two different peoples throughout time, they have a similar sound. There's a kind of assonance in there, and we're both dealing with like warlike peoples. And he says he came into that isolated Puritan country household almost like Sutton himself came into Jefferson, almost complete, without background or past or childhood. A man a little older than his actual years and enclosed and surrounded by a sort of Scythian glitter, who seems to have seduced the country brother and sister without any effort or particular desire to do so, who caused all the uproar, yet from the moment when he realized that Sutton was going to prevent the marriage if he could, he, Bond, seems to have withdrawn into a mere spectator, a passive, a little sardonic, a little enigmatic. He seems to hover, shadowy, almost substanceless, a little behind and above all the other straightforward and logical, even though to him incomprehensible ultimatums and affirmations and defiances and challenges and repudiations with an air of sardonic and indolent detachment, like that of a youthful Roman consul making the grand tour of his day among the barbarian hordes which his grandfather conquered, benighted in a brawling and childish and quite deadly mud castle household in a miasmic and spirit-ridden forest. God, what an amazing sentence, dude. Holy shit, right? And also, I'd forgotten that sentence because barbarian hordes. That's what makes me so even before reading it, before reading that paragraph the first time I read the book, I thought Scythian, then I thought Frisian, and then now rereading it, it reminds me of the fact that the two sort of coalesce in my mind, and I guess they did for the speaker in the book too. And I was about to say poem, but that was like a prose poem, right? The language is almost Whitman-esque or Rambodian, or it's like we're encompassing all things and all history into this one paragraphless page. Look at the page. It's just one. It's just one. There's no paragraph. It's just one block. And the way that the block materializes on the page is the same way that is the same thing about what he's saying about Sutpen here, which is that this guy seemed to just materialize in Mississippi. He just appeared. Bloom says the same thing in his book Genius when he's talking about certain artists. So he divides them up, and so for instance, like he says that an artist like let's say like Mark Twain. Like if you read Mark Twain, you can chart where he is changing, where the speakers in the books change, where they learn things. But as an artist himself, Mark Twain goes through it's kind of again episodic phases of building a life like a normal person does. But there are examples of where artists seem to just materialize. It's like that God created them whole and they were born brilliant and they burn and then they're gone. And the way that the work reads, there's not much that changes or formulates over time. It's already whole there. So Mozart would be an example of this, right? Because Mozart is a prodigy and is writing at a very young age, is writing operas and is writing a libretto, he's writing. He's always making his music whole until he makes his Requiem, the greatest work of art, one of the greatest things ever made by man is Mozart's Requiem, in my opinion. And it's just glorious. It's tremendous. Shakespeare is like that, except we can see some differences in terms of his writing style, especially, I mean, we've done this over the channel, like the differences between Titus Andronicus and Macbeth are stark. There are big differences. But is that to say that his concept of writing changed or that his writing style fit the form? So that's slightly complex. But Rimbaud, for example, Arthur Rimbaud, 1854 to 1891, was born, wrote poems, and then disappeared. There's nothing that changes over the course of his poems. It's like he's born, and he makes these things, and then he's gone. And that's the way that, again, that Faulkner sort of shows Sutpen in this novel right here. Absalom, which, of course, I mean, I haven't even discussed the biblical elements of the book. So, of course, Absalom is the son of David who goes off. And, of course, that's what Sutpen does. His son falls out of favor, and he goes to locate his son in New Orleans outside of their sort of neo-Gnostic Eden in Mississippi. And that's part of the plot of the book, right? There's the esoteric language becomes stronger as the book goes on. On page 109 here, I wrote Joycean sentences and periods. Okay, so he says he better choosing who created in his own image the cold Cerberus of his private hell. Wow, that's amazing, right? He creates the three-headed guard dog to his private hell, which is an aspect of his personality. You can imagine his barking, right? His talking, his barking, and his biting. The face without sex or age, because it had never possessed either. The same Sphinx face which had been born with, which she had been born with, which had looked down from the loft that night beside Judas, and which she still wears now at 74, looking at me with no change, no alteration in it at all, as though it had known to the second when I was to enter, had waited there during that entire 12 miles behind that walking mule and watched me draw nearer and nearer and enter the door at last, as it had known, I perhaps decreed, since there is that justice whose Moloch's palate paunch makes no distinction between grizzle bone and tender flesh, that I should, the face stopping me dead, not my body, it still advanced, ran on, but I myself, that deep existence which we lead, to which the movements of limbs is but a clumsy and belated accompaniment, like so many unnecessary instruments played cruelly and amateurishly out of time to the tune itself, in the barren hall with its naked stair, that carpet gone too, rising into the dim upper hallway where an echo spoke, which was not ruins, but rather that of the lost irrevocable might have been, which haunts all houses. That's so incredible. The irrevocable might have been, which haunts all houses. And that, again, is what I was talking about with the architecture and the structures. Um, so, so just as a counterpoint to that, let's consider briefly, something like Gone with the Wind, which is the exact opposite of this, right? Gone with the Wind is the antebellum. It's before the war, and we have a society in totality in the South with all of its various elements and its hierarchies. But the point of, especially the movie, is that everything is done according to a routine and a ritualized order, and everything is sort of glittering and sparkling in the way that it's presented in the film, right? All the dresses are a vivid velvet. All the characters look youthful. And remember that scene when they announced that the war has started, and you see, like, the young boy grabbing the bugle, everybody's happy. They always have that, and that's true. That's true to life, because that's another thing that was in, it was also in All Quiet on the Western Front. Remember, we did analysis of that, and one of the things in that is that when they announced the beginning of World War I, they didn't call it World War I. What would they have said? There's going to be a part two? When they announced the beginning of the Great War, all of the young men, especially like in the, Prussian military class structure, were ecstatic about this because, and even in America later on, in 1916, all of the, not all, but a general sentiment is that the young men want to go to war because they imagine it in the romantic stories of their youth, the Romanesque stories, right? Where not only will they be serving they'll be fighting for some beautiful girl back home, right, who will wear a ribbon for him while he's gone, but that they'll be on horseback and that they'll be, clashing sabers with the enemy, and that they will ride into glory, right? Dulce et decorum est, right? Pro patria mori, says Wilfred Owen. We did analysis of that. But in the meantime, they ride into the gore and the horror of killing other human beings for the service of people who have no interest in their psychopathic tendencies or care or compunction about using young people to do their bidding. And not all the time, but I'm saying in those major cases. And so we see in one of the things that annoys me in Gone with the Wind is that Scarlett clearly, the paramour is, we have Clark Gable, right, who's Rhett Butler, and he's this rake. Like the first time she sees him, she walks in and, and he's in kind of darker colors, so he's kind of a Byronic hero. And he's a blockade runner, right? He fits into society, and he fits in, and he comes from the same places that everybody else does. But he's involved in he's a smuggler, he's a blockade runner, and he's dangerous. And he clearly loves her, but the whole movie, she's going after Ashley. Oh, where is Ashley? And Ashley is this dude, this is her idealized version of a knight. But meanwhile, Ashley loves Olivia de Havilland. And by the way, Olivia de Havilland is like, she's got to be one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen. I mean, she was so beautiful. I like Elizabeth Taylor too. But like watching her in those movies, she's like just this classically beautiful woman. She's so beautiful. She's so feminine and she's so beautiful. And did you know Olivia de Havilland lived to 104? She remember when she died? She died in like June or July of 2020. She was 104. She was grown like she was a woman in Gone with the Wind. And she was still around in 2020. Right? She retreated off to, I mean, she lived in, I know when they were filming Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, the director replaced Joan Crawford. And he had to go and hire Olivia de Havilland. He had to like take a plane and a boat and hike up a trail all the way to the top of a mountain in Switzerland just to get Olivia de Havilland. I mean, that's like, she's like a true, glittering movie star, right? But anyway, she's beautiful in that movie. But remember, she gets sick. She gets sick in Gone with the Wind, and she's mainly because she's heart sick, right? And Scarlett, right, who's the Scarlet Woman, but Scarlett has to take charge of Tara. Tara was also remember Tara was also the name of Keith Moon's home, I think in Ireland, but it's an Irish name, and it's like and her dad's Irish. Her dad's an Irishman. He's come over from the old country, and he's formed this world for all these people, right? And then it falls apart and it crumbles, and then eventually Atlanta. There's the scene. Remember, there's the famous scene in Gone with the Wind where we see the soldier on the ground, right? We have Sherman's March to the Sea, and we got the burning of Atlanta, and then we go up, right? This sort of God's eye view, and then we see all of the wounded soldiers, and she's overwhelmed, and so she takes charge of this place with this wish of, in this sort of 20th century modernist wish to take charge of the place in a kind of feminist dream, right? Now that's not specific. I'm not saying that's all it is, because she's forced by circumstances to do that, right? Because her dad's gone mad. Ashley is gone. All the men are gone, so they have to take care of the homestead. But when Rhett Butler comes back and they have a life together, she's never happy. And then eventually, remember, he takes his daughter off to live. She goes to school in England, and then she gets killed by the horse, and then they crumble into darkness and decay. And she says, she comes down this glittering, staircase, this wide, classical Roman-looking, height of civilization staircase, while everything else around them is crumbling, but they got to maintain the order and maintain her manners. And then he says, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, and leaves. And then at the end, she says, tomorrow is another day, looking into the sunrise. Well, I think that is interesting because, again, it provides an interesting sort of prerequisite and a counterpoint to what Southern Gothic is. Because when we think of the ambiance of Southern Gothic, we think of things like, the live oaks, right? And the wisteria. We think of the wisteria. But, like my mom said, wisteria is beautiful, and it's beautiful when it blooms, but it's a weed. It's an invasive weed, and it takes over everything. And eventually the roots of the weed get so big, you got to cut it down with a chainsaw. It's very difficult to get rid of, but it is beautiful. And then now that we're in postmodern world, pre 2020, and then we're into the G reset, we can perfectly see how society has gone into this thing where we have, like, for instance, True Detective. True Detective is probably the best example of true Southern Gothic in terms of its apotheosis, right? Because, like in this scene, we have Matthew McConaughey. This is the great scene. If anybody hasn't seen True Detective season 1, what are you doing? Right? How could they have put this on a television at all? It's kind of like Twin Peaks in the early 90s, like this and Twin Peaks. So in this scene, this is where Matthew McConaughey is trying to infiltrate the gang, right? And, he's got to make it out of the house, and it's this long extended shot where he's got this guy, and then he's running all over the place, and he's trying to make his way out. But True Detective is really the sort of apotheosis of Southern Gothic, because now we've gone completely out of the world of the antebellum world, and it's just a distant memory. We still have the power structure that exists from there, but like a wisteria, they can make beautiful things, but they are a weed, strangling everything, right? And so that's why, spoiler, that's why in True Detective, the the rituals, right, and the blackmail operation that's going on, and the rituals and the dark satanic rituals meant to invert God's order through absolute terror and through entrapping the people that they do in their society, like in their little secret society, is the way that it is in the book where, I mean, in the movie where they're worshiping this. They've gone back so far past the old world that now they're going back into these like Moloch worshiping pagan Yellow King. Yeah, oh, he get dark here in Carcosa. Oh, it's in Carcosa. You in Carcosa now, boy. Right, and that's why you have in the denouement of the television show, right? Matthew McConaughey is going through this like Louisiana bayou weeded swampland, trying to get to the heart of this conspiracy, right? To find the Yellow King, and then eventually, in a moment of magical realism, sees the swirling vortex in the sky above them, right? It's like he also sees the spiral figures in the sky because it's inverted, right? Because that's their symbolism for inversion, taking you down to the abyss, right? Taking all of the good things and inverting them into the darkness. And this is actually a picture. This is interesting because this is let's see. This picture right here was taken above this is where I went to my first year of school. I went here on a theater scholarship, Rhodes College, Rhodes, Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee, right in the city. And so this is a beautiful school. It's an amazing school. And I only left because I went abroad. I went to Europe. But this right here sort of encapsulates Southern Gothic because we have literally a Gothic building. This is one of the main buildings on the campus, a Gothic building with a Gothic sort of clock tower, church tower, Gothic windows illuminated with a swirling tornado sky above it, right there in Memphis, right above the Delta, right above Mississippi, right there in the corner of Tennessee, right, Memphis 10. And so this to me is what Southern Gothic is. It is a mix of seeing signs and wonders and having to decipher whether these are evil spirits and that are creating illusions, right, in order to influence characters in the works. We're going to see that in Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. Or whether we should simply follow our virtue, right, and try and understand and maintain the God's hierarchy. So that's Rhodes College. So let's see. Here's a picture, by the way. I'll just show you these again. These were in my little mood. I call them a mood board, right? When you're trying to make your little palette, your fashion palette. This is my literary palette. This is my mood board here. Here's William Faulkner at UVA. This is when he was a professor there for a few years. So right there on the left, we have the rotunda. UVA is, what was it, 1819? Mr. Jefferson's University, right? Wahoo wah. My uncle went there. A bunch of family members went there. My either UVA, William and Mary, or Ole Miss, but they went to those places. But my uncle went to UVA, and a lot of my friends went there. You know, honestly, if I could, you know, I won't say much about what I'm doing in my, in my work life, but I would like one day, if I sort of, an idealized thing would be that if academia wasn't poisoned with the mandatory stabbies and all that stuff, maybe that'll go away. Because otherwise, forget it. But, in the future one day, if that were to disappear, it would be great to be an English professor at living in Charlottesville, right? Somewhere, um, you know, somewhere near, Albemarle County, or up then near Charlottesville or in the city, right? Uh, right there on in the mountains. UVA is beautiful. Charlottesville is a beautiful town, beautiful college town with amazing, amazing bookstores. And so that's the rotunda right there, which was designed and built by Thomas Jefferson. It's right near Monticello. Uh, Northerners all the time want to call it Monticello, but it's Monticello, and that's the green right there. That's where all the fraternities were founded, right there, on that green. Oh, Edgar Allan Poe was there, and then you can see the columns in the background. And look at William Faulkner right there with his pipe and his tweed. So that's when he was a professor there. And here is William Faulkner's writing desk at Roanoke in Oxford, Mississippi. Who knows? Maybe I'd go down and be in the Southern Writers Center at Ole Miss. I got to publish my novel first, and you can help me to do that and support me by supporting me with the links in the video description and with Cash App, PayPal, Venmo. Those get to me directly. You can also support me with super chats and dono chats, but I really could use your support, and that will help me to be able to work on my book. And I'm working on two things right now. And anyway, there's William Faulkner's writing desk with his old typewriter. I don't know what kind of typewriter it is. A Remington, maybe? I don't know what that is. And his pipe tobacco right there. He's got a big ashtray. I've got an ashtray just like that, made out of artillery shells. And anyway, that's cool. It's a cool place to visit. You can see there's one room where his the plot of one of the works he was working on when he died is mapped out on the wall, and he's got a nice little library, mid-century house, mid-century library. The house is not mid-century. It's a looks like an old plantation house. But it's really cool. It's a cool place to visit if you like that. If you like writers. And of course, I guess now let's take a break from doing the books and let's talk about a movie. Let's talk about a film. You guys want to talk about a film? So, Cold Mountain. Let's talk about the movie Cold Mountain. Okay. So here's the James River, named for King James. Right, 1607, Jamestown, here in Virginia. There's the James River right there. What bridge is that? It's not the Huguenot Bridge. That's down there in downtown. It's not the Nickel Bridge. There's a bridge called the Nickel Bridge, but it doesn't cost a nickel anymore. It costs probably $1 now, but that's probably the Manchester Bridge. But anyway, there's the James River, right? Class whatever rapids going right through the city, right there on the fall line, and that is where they filmed part of Cold Mountain in the early 2000s. Well, let me tell you about the James River. So I read the other day that they fished 25 bodies out of the James River. What is happening? What I hear about this all the time, because people go, they go rafting and kayaking and canoeing on the James River, or they go swimming in it. Even though you can get brain worms, apparently now you get brain worms in the James River because of all the chemicals in the ketones. A boy had a brain worm a few years ago. But I used to go out there with my friend Cheever. Shouts out to Cheever. My friend Cheever and I, and my friends Cheever, Spencer, Hunter, Andrew, Taylor, we would either go tubing or we would get on Cheever's boat and we would go out there and we get on the rope swing right up there by one of the waterfalls. And of course, we would also play in the Kanawha Canal, which is where the train tracks go, right by the Kanawha Canal. We jump off the cliffs. That was our place to hang out, right behind my friend's house. Jump off a 40-foot cliff into the Kanawha Canal, which was barely had any water in it one time. I almost died. And then my friend Hunter pushed somebody off the cliffs, and they fell in. The goal was to jump off the cliff. There was a low cliff and a high cliff, and the goal was to jump off the cliffs when the train was going by. But anyway, the James River is a beautiful river. It is wonderful. And it is beautiful. And so all the rocks there, that's where they filmed part of Cold Mountain. So let's talk about Cold Mountain. So Coal Mountain is um, a book by Charles Frazier, who I think he won the National Book Award for this. Came out in like 1998. The movie came out, and I remember my mom wanted me to go be an extra in the film. I was like, I didn't do it for some reason. I think because I had to get back to drama school. But it's a good film. It's directed by the guy who did The English Patient, and it should be better than it is. There's something missing in it, but it's got Philip Seymour Hoffman, Natalie Portman, Giovanni Ribisi, Cillian Murphy. Um, it's got a whole bunch of people in supporting roles, and then of course Renee Zellweger won the Best Supporting Actress for it. It's got Nicole Kidman and Jude Law in the major roles. It's also got Ray Winstone. It's got Ray Winstone and Charlie Hunnam. And Charlie Hunnam, who didn't really break till later, is a truly sinister bad guy in the film. Let me see if I can find his picture on here. PSH. Yeah, here's Charlie Hunnam, and he plays a kind of weird, like blue-eyed albino demon character, like a demon of the air character, and they're part of the Home Guard. So what happens is Coal Mountain, which is I guess in North Carolina around Asheville, we have some friends who are around Asheville. They probably don't want me to say, but yeah. So we have some friends who are around Asheville. Here's another picture of Asheville and Coal Mountain. Hold on. Here is where's this picture? Hold on. Oh, here's the Coal Mountainscape. Okay. So this is in the mountains of the Appalachian Mountains near North Carolina. There's a rainbow going down right there. In Virginia, you get to the Blue Ridge Mountains. There we got these green mountains with the mist. Right, it's where they filmed Last of the Mohicans. And okay, so Jethro says it. There you go. So Jethro says it. Coal Mountain, not too far from me. Now I can say it because he says it. Yes, Jethro, down there near Coal Mountain. And so what happens is we get a guy. What's his name? Inman, maybe Jude Law, and he's up there. He's one of the common boys, and he's putting up, making buildings, and then in comes Nicole Kidman. She's the daughter of a preacher. And they come into town, and they glimpse each other. She's kind of looking for a husband, and he sees her, And then the war breaks out. Immediately the war breaks out. They hear news that they're going to go off and go fight. But the problem is that the Home Guard is there, and the Home Guard is notorious because they're kind of a kind of auxiliary paramilitary group that is supposed to catch deserters and traitors, right, and maintain law and order while all the men are away at the war. And most of the war is fought in Virginia, right? So they're all away. And so these are a group of, degenerate dudes led by Ray Winstone, and they are going to basically run a kind of mafia style and retaliatory paramilitary group, auxiliary group, while everybody else is away. Kind of a combination of police, military, and bounty hunters, right? Well, Jude Law goes off and he fights in the siege of Petersburg. Of course, he's fighting for the rebels, and he's fighting at the crater. So there's a great scene where they actually filmed this, I think, in Romania, the part with the crater. But that is not far from me. That's about 10 minutes from me. And that's where, 70,000 people were killed. So what happened was the Union forces tried to underlay the Confederate forces with mines, and blew a gigantic crater in the earth. And then instead of going around the crater and surrounding the forces, they filled in the crater, and it became a turkey shoot, and a bunch of people were killed. Right. A couple of books that deal with this. I'm not going to show the cover of this because it's got symbolism on the front of the book that you can't show here. I'm worried about showing, so I'll just say it's called Gray Fox, Robert E. Lee and the Civil War. That's one book about it. And then another one This one's good because this one deals with where I am, and that's Richmond's burning, because Richmond was completely burned. Obviously, this is by Nelson Langford, and then I've got a great book on Stonewall Jackson over there. I wrote with Stonewall. All those deal with all of those military operations. Yeah, even when it's backwards. Yeah, because the symbolism is the same front and backward because it shows a certain flag. So I'm not going to put that on there. But you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so that's two books that deal, that's three books that deal with that. But so Jude Law survives and he's wounded, but then he deserts. He decides to leave and get back to Nicole Kidman because now he's in love with her. Now Nicole Kidman is totally wrong for this movie. She kind of looks right, and she has the correct sort of disposition. She's sweet and innocent, and she's too highfalutin to be able to take care of the property. So that's where Renee Zellweger comes in. And actually, I will say that when I first watched this movie, I knew that she was going to win the Oscar right away because she is very good in the movie. She's very good. She sort of plays against type, and she's kind of a fierce. She's like what they say about Ariel, and not Ariel. Remember we did The Tempest. Although she is small, she is fierce. That's Renee Zellweger's character in this, and of course she is also brokenhearted and lovelorn. And her father is I guess her father, played by Brendan Gleeson, is a kind of drunken, wandering hobo, and she's upset about this. But he's got his gang of guys who are kind of just like wandering around, being sort of minstrels, but not fighting in the war, right? And one of those is Ethan Suplee, pre-fitness, right? Leo's BFF, and another one is Jack White. So Jack White is in the film, and he falls in love with Renee Zellweger, and thankfully, spoiler, he lives in the movie, so they're able to maintain continuity in a family, even though it's a tragic love story. So what happens is Jude Law has to go on an odyssey on the way back from the war, right, which is the Odyssey. So he's the sort of Odysseus character trying to get back to Penelope. And so on the way, he meets a number of different characters, one of whom is Philip Seymour Hoffman, who steals the movie. He is fantastic in this. So Philip Seymour Hoffman, he encounters near Richmond, and it was filmed in Richmond on the rocks, and he sees Philip Seymour Hoffman as a kind of apostate pastor who is about to kill this girl that he has gotten pregnant. And he says, "Oh, I am lovelorn and lost. I am struck down in the mighty wilderness of my love. Please forgive me as I drop my paramour lover down into the abyssal waters of the mighty James." And Jude Law encounters him, and he says, "Hold up there, stop that. You better not drop that girl." So the problem is that Philip Seymour Hoffman is going to kill this girl because he doesn't want to risk scandal. And he's got these Samson locks. And he puts down the girl, so the girl lives, right? And her baby will live, thankfully. And then Jude Law says, "Come with me." And he takes him into town. This part was filmed in Charleston. He takes him into town. He ties him up to a post, and he puts a sign above him that basically says, philanderer or whatever. And then the next time we see Philip Seymour Hoffman, he is at a ferry crossing, and he helps to save him. He says, "I will save thee, even though thou hast shorn the locks from my Samson head in my disgust and my dishonor." Jenna Malone, you remember her? She's in all these esoteric movies. She's in Hunger Games. She's in Neon Demon. She plays the ferry girl, who is the kind of Karen, right? Charon, ferrying them across so they don't get caught up by the home guard in that area and get shot. Well, she gets shot crossing the water. And then they make it to Giovanni Ribisi. Giovanni Ribisi acts like he is going to help them, but then pimps them out to this bevy of women that he finds. What's that other Sofia Coppola movie, you guys? She did. It was about the same thing. It had Kirsten Dunst in it, and it was kind of an anti-Little Women. What do you call that? The Beguiled, right? He's got these beguiled girls, and of course this is a honey trap. So then he sells them when they get caught to the home guard, and they're all in chains. They're going to be shot sold and then shot for treason. But then the Yankees come around and they escape in their chains, and then Jude Law gets away. And then he encounters Natalie Portman, who is about to be assaulted by these two marauding Yankees, including Cillian Murphy, and the guy. The guy doing it is the bad guy in the movie Barbarian, and he's also in Mandy. You remember that guy, the real scary guy? And he takes her baby and puts the baby on the cold ground. Natalie Portman is heartbroken because her lover, her husband, is gone off to the war, and she wants to sleep the night in virtue with Jude Law. That's all she wants to do, just have a man next to her. This is pretty based, actually, because she just wants a man. She wants her husband back so that she can raise her family. But she's protected in this instance by Jude Law. Jude Law also, when he gets injured later on, he has to go to this witch doctor woman, who is like a hobbit woman who pulls him out of the mountains. She gives him laudanum, so he takes some of that sweet, sweet opium and goes to sleep. And in the sleep, he sees dreams where he's going back to Natalie Portman. So we have all the elements of Southern Gothic here. I'm going kind of fast, but got a lot to cover. We have all the elements of Southern Gothic. We've got live oaks, antebellum, war, right? Bellum. We've got phantasmagoria, violence, the crossover in the societal structure between the white people and the black people. We've got dastardly deeds and decay, physically, morally, and spiritually. We've got opiated drug taking. We've got Natalie Portman, who at one point, this is the key scene in the movie, she goes down to see a kind of fortune teller, and they tell her, if you want to see Inman again, is that his name, Inman? If you want to see him again, lean back on this well and look in the reflection. So what happens in this scene is, this is what they do at the Blarney Stone in Crispy's Ireland, right? They lean you backwards and you kiss the Blarney Stone, then you get the gift of the gab, which I obviously kissed the Blarney Stone. So they lean her back over the well, and this reminds me of that scene again in Westworld season 2, where Delios says in that moment of pure Gnostic apotheosis in the movie. Remember, he's been going through this cyclical hell where he's trying to become he's a transhumanist. He's trying to live forever in the body of a new synthetic shell with his Dreno mind locked in, right, in the little ball, right? They keep their essence in this red ball, and they put it in the brain, but it just burns every day. Yes, and he says in that scene, they told you there were two, one above, one below, but then you realized it was just one, and it was the devil looking back down at you. Because he's burning in hell. Like literally in the scene, there's a hellish burning. And because their world is ruled completely by Lucifer. And so the same sort of thing here occurs here with the sort of well archetype symbolism, where we have a character who is lost. She's heartbroken. She's trying to fill her hole. She's the hole in her heart. She's trying to find Inman. And she sees in the mirror reflection, so it's the psychic mirror looking down into the bottom of the well. She says, I don't see anything. She sees the kind of waves in the water at the bottom of the well. But in the waves, she sees black dots, and they end up being what looks like birds on a snowy hill, and she sees a man in shadow coming towards her. And then that actually comes true in the end of the movie, because at the end of the movie, after all these people have been shot, and after Charlie Hunnam, the bad guy, has murdered this family, and Jude Law has tried to make his way through, he ends up getting back to Cold Mountain, and it's truly cold. It's in the snow now. He comes around the corner, and Nicole Kidman is pointing a gun at him. And in this scene right here, that's the exact vision of her dreams, right? So he's coming off the mountain, the cold mountain. He's a shadow of his former self. She saw him in shadow. She saw him in this spectral vision at the bottom of an esoteric and literal and figurative well. And she's about to shoot him. She's about to destroy her own lover, but she doesn't, right? And then he's about to turn away and walk back out of her life, but they unite, they make love. Now they're going to be together, but then the bad guys show up, and Jude Law has to be the alpha man here, protect them. He kills all the bad guys because he's just come from the war, and then he gets shot in when he's shooting Charlie Hunnam off of his horse. He says, "What makes you think that you can get me?" And Charlie Hunnam has this great line. It's one of his only lines in the movie, and he says, "The confidence of youth." And he pulls his gun, but we know they both get shot. Charlie Hunnam dies, and then Jude Law gets shot, and then it becomes a tragic love story. But in the end, we see the family all united. Renee Zellweger's father has lived, even though he was tortured by the bad guys and shot. And we see that there's going to be continuity into the New South, right? With Jack White now united with Renee Zellweger, and they've got kids, and it sort of goes off into the sunset here. So it's an interesting movie. It's actually pretty well done in terms of Southern Gothic and incorporating all those elements. I asked for the book for Christmas, so I'm going to read the book. I haven't read the book. I'm going to get it for Christmas and then read it, and then I'm sure it'll be totally different from the movie. So I'll be going over that later. So let me catch my breath for a second. How's everybody doing? How's everybody doing? What does Ace Ventura say? I'm just here at the party. And how is everybody feeling tonight? If I'd been drinking from the toilet, I might have been killed. Yes, I was watching Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi today, and I realized that R2-D2 is a programmer. He's a computer programmer hacker, right? Also, obviously R2-D2 and C-3PO are Laurel and Hardy. That comes from the Hidden Fortress, from Akira Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress. The symbolism and the staging and the characters, but it's also the archetypal sort of commedia duo, right? Tall, skinny guy, short, fat guy. So C-3PO and R2-D2, right? Also, remember when the Ewoks in Jedi take over? You know, there's the shaman. The Ewoks are led by a shaman. That's why they are going to worship the golden idol of C-3PO at the end, right? They're an animistic society. Isn't that crazy on Endor? Also, that Carrie Fisher is totally out of her mind in Return of the Jedi. She's completely whacked out. Have you noticed that? The scenes where she is talking to Luke in Return of the Jedi and they're on the rope bridge, and then Han comes over and he's like, "Well, you love her." Notice the way she looks and the way she's talking. You can tell that she is completely zonked. She talks about that in her book Postcards from the Edge, like she was on Percodan and all this stuff. And rest in peace, because she died a few years ago, right, with all that stuff. I don't know what all that was about. That was probably some sort of humiliation involved in that, at least in the story of it after her death. But she came back and was in the films. But Postcards from the Edge is a good book. But I think she was totally whacked out. She talks about it in her book, but rest in peace. And so that's interesting. What else? Oh, I watched Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which JD and Jamie covered when it came out. By the way, I'm just taking a little break here from blabbering about Southern Gothic for a minute, catch my breath. So let me drink some of that sweet GMO sweet tea. You got to drink some sweet tea because we're talking about Southern Gothic here, and of course I'm in Virginia. I'm Virginia born, partly Virginia bred. I'm probably as Southern as you can get in a way, right? I'm half Virginian, half Mississippian. Pure 100% English, Anglo, and you know, educated in the old country, right? But you know, probably my heart's in Belfast, but you know, my heart and my mind are Virginia. This is where I'm going to live and die. So, you know, I figured it would be fitting to talk. I love Virginia. I love Virginia. I love the South, and I love this country. I do. You know, we got a lot of problems, obviously, but I love it, and I thank God every day for the bounteous beauty of Virginia. Sincerely. So anyway, so shouts out to JD and Jamie because they did Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And Jason, remind me of that question in a second. I'll get back to that. It's a good question. Shouts out to Jason out there and Jethro and all the members out there too. Shouts out to Kristen and everybody. And if you want to grab a membership, you can do that. So Jamie and Jay covered the movie. It was fantastic analysis, of course. And Jamie will be joining me Tuesday night here. We will be covering something else Southern, which is all things Elvis and the movie Priscilla by Sofia Coppola. I've done a Sofia Coppola movie before, right, with our friend Chase. I did the movie we did Lost in Translation. And so Jamie will be here Tuesday night. And then Thursday night, our friend David Patrick Harry will be joining us. We'll be doing an analysis of Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita. So please join us for those because it's going to be a big week, right, to have our friends on here. We love our friends. Jamie's got a stream tonight, so hope everybody can be over there. Jamie Hanshaw Dyer, over at her channel. Yeah, I think Jack White is like 1977. He's 3 years older than me. Jason says, I'll get back to Indiana Jones in a second. Says, is Hateful Eight a Southern Gothic piece? In a way. I recently rewatched it, and it's more interesting than I thought originally. That's a good question. I actually really dislike that movie, just personally. It has nothing to do with your question. But I personally really dislike that movie. I think it's gratuitous and sick. And not in a way where I'm a prude, right? Because I like Quentin Tarantino movies, and I think the violence is stylized, and it's like that for a purpose, for a reason. But I really don't like that movie. There are a couple of scenes in it in particular that I don't like. I don't like the scene with Jennifer Jason Leigh at the beginning. I don't like what happens with her in the movie. I don't like, Samuel L. Jackson's character in the movie and what happens there. I think it's not funny to me. It's not funny, and it doesn't provide anything. It doesn't have to provide anything uplifting. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to be, revenge, but it's just too gratuitous for me. But is it Southern Gothic? Not really. It's not, because it doesn't have any of the phantasmagorical or the esoteric elements that we've talked about. It doesn't have anything about the crumbling South. It's about the West, which is different. And although we have one character, Bruce Dern, who is supposed to be a throwback to that, we're on to another sequence, which is Western literature, and it's kind of a Western. The Western is only Southern Gothic if it has those elements. And Tombstone is verging on Southern Gothic because Doc Holliday and because Arizona was a Allied rebel territory in the war. But by that point, we're moving on to something else, which is weird because we go back to Southern Gothic in the country, but it's a totally different locus. It's a totally different place. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I'll say this in terms of, I'm not like reviewing the movie, but I'll just say, so I'm being generous here with the movie. I think it's, first of all, it's about time travel. Okay, so it's that. But in light of the fact that the Marvel universe seems to be dead now, which is interesting because what are we going to go on to, right? We had vampires and then we had superheroes, so what's going to be the next thing? Certainly something that's much more overtly demonic, probably, even than those two. But I don't know. But I think that in light of Marvel being gone and this movie being made at the tail end of that, maybe there'll be one more last gasp. But I know they came out with a movie this weekend it's kind of the nail in the coffin. Even Bob Iger makes statements about it. So, but it's got time travel, and it's not the multiverse. It's just time travel. But even with that, it did have an interesting way of looking at it. I appreciated the Archimedes element in the movie, and even the saying verbally of, no, those are Roman triremes. I thought that was interesting. I thought that alone kind of saved it for me in terms of, okay, it's like, look, I realize that I'm watching. It's not a standalone movie. It's the end of a quintet, right? Um, but the movies do have to stand alone, even if they're part of that. And so Harrison Ford is kind of miserable throughout the movie, but that's fitting for his age in the film. But he's kind of too miserable in the movie. I didn't like the. I don't like what's her name that wrote the TV show that it plays the female star in this. I don't like her. She puts me. I find her disingenuous in the film. Not to mention the fact she's always subverting his characters. It's like, are you good or bad? Now that plays a role in the film because she's supposed to be kind of on both sides and she, money hungry. But there was no heart. There wasn't much heart to it. She kind of saves herself at the end in their situation because she saves him. But I appreciated that element. And if you can just sit back and watch the movie and try and enjoy it for being a dumb adventure movie, it's kind of refreshing because there are very few of those now. So you kind of just have to let yourself watch a movie and go, okay, we're watching an adventure movie, and it has elements from the previous world we lived in, right, where Indiana Jones took place, and those historical elements. So it's like, okay, that's okay. But the thing that really kills it is, or ruins it, is the like 3 hours of Harrison Ford being played by an AI, deepfake, right? It's animated. It's obviously not him, and you're looking at it, and it's just alienating. So, and speaking of it, but I would watch it though because it's just a big movie and it's fun. I think you should watch movies, right? So it has good and bad elements. It's not high art, but it's something. Speaking of alienation, again, Jamie is tomorrow. Is it tomorrow night, Jethro? Thank you. Yes, tomorrow night, not Tuesday night. What is it? When's the stream with Jamie? I don't remember days very well. What is the? Yeah, no, it's Tuesday night. Yeah, Jamie's stream is with me is Tuesday night. And okay, Jamie's stream by herself is tomorrow night. Okay, not tonight. I see. Thank you, Jethro. Appreciate it. So yes. Okay. So moving on. Speaking of alienation is one of the themes of the Priscilla movie that we're going to cover, and certainly is one of the overriding themes in Southern Gothic. So let's see. We did Wild Palms. We did ABSALOM. We did Cold Mountain. Briefly, I'll say that Ambrose Bierce's An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge is definitely Southern Gothic because what it's about is basically a character who is it's set during Civil War, and a character gets captured and he's about to be hanged from a bridge. Hanged, not hung. Hung as an object. Hanged as a person. He's about to be hanged from the bridge, and then the rope breaks. He escapes, and then he's going back to his loved one. But we see in the story that this is all kind of a last minute flash of the promise of life, because really it's just the moment from the stool kicking out or whatever, him being thrown off the bridge, to that long, dark journey to the end of that rope. And then the story's over. Now, if this were now, then the story would be terrible because, it was all a dream is the worst trope that you can have in a story. It's lazy and stupid. But it's okay in this one because the form and the content fit, and because we see that plays into the overriding themes in Southern Gothic literature, and because this is one of the first of its kind. So it's actually pretty well done. I would read that short story if I were you. But one of the things that it does is it alienates the reader from what you have just read, but that's purposeful because the character is crossing over into death. And so we're supposed to be alienated from his life experience and from the method of his death because he is alienated from his family because he's been captured and now he's about to be killed. Let's see what else. A Worn Path by Eudora Welty. Eudora Welty is one of the great Southern writers, and she was definitely resistant to the term Southern Gothic. In fact, when this term was first used in the early 20th century, she made a statement saying, "I hope they're not going to call me that." And A Worn Path is about an old black lady that is making an odyssey across the hills and dales of the South in order to get medicine for this boy. But what's really well done about it is that it shows, first of all, the kind of weird unspoken symbiosis in society where we have two different halves of society that are living together, in a kind of weird, uncomfortable harmony. And at one point, she sees like visions. She's like walking with a cane across this field, and she thinks she sees a man in the field, and then she sees that it's a scarecrow. Then at one point, she like there's a snake, and she's talking. It's like she's commanding nature, and then she falls into a ravine. She's picked up by a white dude who's out hunting with his dogs, and she commands the dogs. Then the dogs run off, and then eventually she makes her way all the way and gets the medicine for this boy. But what the story shows is that perseverance is a major element within Southern Gothic, because we have a character who is making her way through this sort of fantasia of is what she's seeing real, or is it a dream? Are we to believe what she says? Who's the speaker? And so finally, we see that she is persevering, and she's old, but even the old people are like hickory, right? Like she's so strong she can make her way through it, and that sometimes the youth must rely on the old in order to survive so they can take their place. Digital Minefield, our friend Maddie says, have you read any of Carson McCullers? Just finished The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. Seemed quasi-Southern Gothic to me, but definitely a worthwhile read. I'm not really that familiar with Carson McCullers. But when I think of The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, I always think of The Night of the Hunter, which is Robert Mitchum, right? Hate and love, right, on his knuckles. Thank you for that $4.99, Maddie. Really appreciate that. So Eudora Welty's A Worn Path is a short story, but it's allegorical, and it's worth reading in terms of this genre. Everything That Rises Must Converge by Flannery O'Connor. We couldn't really get through a Southern Gothic story without talking about Flannery O'Connor. Yes, and thank you for that membership. Digital Minefield becomes a member, a high IQ book enjoyer. So Everything That Rises Must Converge is interesting because, again, it's packed. It's the language and the symbolism is packed into this short story. What we have is this woman who is she's going to like a weight loss meeting or something, and she's a bigger woman. She's got her son with her who's grown, and she puts on this outfit that the son laughs at, and then they have to ride a public bus, and they have to get to this place. But what happens is that when they're on the bus, they're sitting apart, and then basically her mirror, a black woman gets on that's basically her mirror, and is wearing the same hat and sits next to the original woman's son, and then that woman's son sits with his mom. So we get a sort of a mix and match. And then we can tell that the son is looking at his mom, and he knows that she's thinking, oh, I'm going to give this poor kid, I'm going to give this kid a nickel when they get off the bus. Now, what happens is he says, don't do it, don't give it to him. And they get off the bus, and she reaches in, she says, I don't have a nickel. She gives a penny. She drops the penny. And then the woman's, the other woman, the black woman, hits her with the purse and says, we don't need any of your charity. Thank you very much. Get on over here. She's trying to get her son over to her. Stop messing around on the bus. And then the original son laughs at his mother and says, I told you, we live in a new world. This is the new South. You need to come to terms with what's happening and what's changed. His mother slips and falls, and he looks down at her. She's had a stroke. One eye is looking at him, the other eye is moving off, and she dies, looking in horror at her son. So what we see in this, everything that rises must converge. We see that the two halves and the two halves in society flip, and that the mother lives in a world where she is part of the old structure, and she thinks with a generous heart that she's giving this child some money because that's what she would have done, but she is unaware of the new set of morals and mores that she's supposed to abide by. Whereas the other mother is broken from that and is now totally in the new world. So the two sons are flip-flopped because the black woman's son is he's a little kid, and he's totally innocent, and he looks up at the white mom like he loves her, and they obviously have this connection. Whereas the white boy and the black woman sit together, and they are both filled with this like spirit of spite. And what it's saying is that there's a place when you cross over into the new society where you have to play by a set of rules and understand the individual responses that you're going to get. It's not all or nothing. Remember, Harold Bloom was talking about all or nothing at the beginning of this stream, and so there's a midpoint in which they have to react. But the white boy's son, is the worst because he realizes at the end that his mother knows that he's full of hate, and he is, and he thinks that he is the good guy in the story because he's trying to tell his mom to abide by the new set of rules, but he's lacking any spirit of Christian charity or generosity, and he's only filled with spite and hate, which is what he thinks that his mother is filled with, but it's actually him. So that's a good story. Again, it's called Everything That Rises Must Converge, and again, this is true Southern Gothic, but it's not set in the 19th century, and it's not, I mean, even Faulkner, right? Faulkner's constantly setting things in the past, moving into the present. So it becomes a kind of saga. This is not that. It's all episodic, and it's truly revelatory for right now, right? Yes, Kit, exactly. Yes. Yes, it's so incredible how relevant it is to now, right? Because we oftentimes think that our attitudes, or we're shocked by people's attitudes or the way that they want to move through the world. We're shocked by those things, and we forget that right, there's nothing new under the sun. A lot of these things have occurred, and that oftentimes the people who went through them first, or even that wrote about them, or even that predicted them, right, we forget that they are not new. Now, that's not to say that they're not new things. I mean, certainly there's a newer version of things that we're going through now that is completely wild. But again, it's been written about, right? So next, let's do, let's see, The Gift. The Gift is a movie with, what's her name? So many names. I've mentioned so many names. Toledo. What's the name? Toledo's New Zealand, but what's the name of? Is she New Zealand? The actress. What's the name of the lady? God, she's in every movie, and she's in Lord of the Rings, and she's in The Gift. What's her name? She's in The Life Aquatic, right? She plays Cubby. Anyway, what's her fucking name? Somebody tell me her name. The blonde actress. She was in Elizabeth. I don't want to have to look it up. She's the main star of The Gift. And she's in The Missing. The Missing is actually really good. The Gift is from like the 2000s, not Hepburn. That's that. Yeah. Anyway, so The Gift is about this woman, this poor woman in the South, and she sees crime through her tarot cards, right? And her tarot cards, Kate Blanchett, thank you so much. Yes. She's like, I'm in the South. I'm in the Southern Gothic. Is this a great movie? This is the one with Katie Holmes in it, where Katie Holmes, well, anyway, there's a great scene. This is when Katie Holmes was like still making movies. But basically, there's high society, and they are mistreating women One character is not they, but one character um, is specifically mistreating a woman, and she gets murdered, and we have to figure out who the murderer is. And Kate Blanchett can only see things through visions, and she's playing with her weird tarot cards, which all have like the shapes of waves on them because she's like it's like the spirit of water or something because they're in the bayou. I don't know. It's a pretty good movie. I'm not doing a deep analysis of this movie. I'm just mentioning it. But it is worth mentioning because again, it's kind of sets a prerequisite for the next work that I'm about to talk about. And we have a character who is a fortune teller who is drawn into the murder because of her fortune telling. She can see the murder, but she also becomes a part of the story because she's playing around with demons. And they're constantly going to her house and she's looking at these damn cards with water on them. So that's the gift. It's good it's a good Southern Gothic movie because of its ambiance. Another one would be In the Electric Mist, which I watched recently with John Goodman, Tommy Lee Jones, right? Tommy Lee Jones is good in it. Was it worth it? Yeah, it was worth it. If you're strong enough, right? And that one's good because again, it's a murder mystery set in the bayou. Another one is Just Cause. People have probably forgotten about that one. Just Cause with Ed. What's his face? Oh, gosh, the guy from the Truman Show. And The Rock. Ed. I've thought of so many. I've had so many names going through this damn thing. I can't think of the guy's name. And Sean Connery is in it. Ed, what's his face? Somebody help me out. He plays the bad guy in this movie, and again, the character's thrown into the bayou, eaten by alligators. Hell or High Water is a great movie, but it's not Southern Gothic. Again, that's Western because it's Texas dust. Whenever you have dust as a natural element in a film, right? He was in the Jackson Pollock movie. Ed Harris. Thank you, DM for it. Yes, thank you, Ed Harris. God, he plays such a good character, and he's totally psychotic in the movie. Whenever you have dust rather than tropicalia, I'll call it, rather than tropical heat waves, live oaks, right? Virginia creepers, Virginia, when you have wisteria or mountains, it's no longer Southern Gothic, just as a general statement. But that is a great movie, and it's actually really good. I really like that movie, Hell or High Water. It's another cops and robbers movie, though, right? With the brothers, with the kind of Gemini twins trying to control their land over the encroaching, big country globalist oil magnates trying to take over everything. And it's just truly, definitely a statement. It's kind of predictive because it's a statement about the way that, U.S. government as a globalist arm seeks to crush its own people and just run a highway right over them. So speaking of that, why don't I go into Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte next? Because this is great. This is a great movie. Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. So Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, I first watched when I was like 8 years old. My mom showed it to me, that and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, because I think it was Halloween and I wanted to watch scary movies, and I really liked. We used to watch the black and white movies like Swamp Thing and The Mummy and The Wolfman and Dracula. I liked those old black and white movies when I was little. I thought they were cool, and so instead of some kind of terrible slasher thing or whatever, which is funny because this ends up being a slasher movie. My mom showed me Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, and I thought it was so scary, but it's scary in a positive, in a different way. And what's crazy is that this movie, first of all, is technically a slasher movie in a way. It's got Bruce Dern in it and George Kennedy, who was in Cool Hand Luke, but Bruce Dern we just talked about with The Hateful Eight. He's a young guy. And so what happens in the movie is this. We're in Louisiana. We're, again, on an old family plantation home. And we start off, we got this guy, Big Sam. I don't like how you've been meeting up with my daughter, and there ain't no way she gonna marry a philandering scum like you. I ought to kill you, is what he says. And Bruce Dern is the husband, or Bruce Dern is a cheating husband. He's cheating on his wife with the daughter of this guy, Big Sam, who owns this home. And Bruce Dern says that he's there and he loves your daughter, and I'm gonna ask her to marry him. But he's married. Big Sam doesn't like this. So then we cut to, there's a party. There's a black tie event. And all the fellas are wearing, black, they're wearing tails, black tie and tails. And all the women are in their ball gowns. And we're at the same house. We're at Big Sam's house. Big Sam is a big skulking looking, head of this family, right? Well, we're in the house, we're having the party, and then Bruce Dern goes out to the, aviary or whatever, and he's been told by Big Sam that he has to break it off with Big Sam's daughter. So he's about to do that. And then he meets up with Charlotte, and he says, so I just can't marry you. I can't. Let me see if I can find a picture of this. Here's the Live Oaks. And if you've never been to the South, then you won't know, you don't really understand like what this creates in terms of an ambiance and an atmosphere, because the Live Oaks are in the weeping willows. The Live Oaks are these gigantic oak trees with this feeling of beautiful decay to them, right? Like you look how the greenery kind of falls down like that, and these are really prevalent in the Deep South. And so what happens is he breaks it off with Charlotte, and then he's sitting there in the aviary, and we see these two women inside, these two other women. They're walking through the party. All the fellas are going after him, and then we hear a door open, kind of a door creak open, and we see Bruce Dern look up, and he says, Charlotte, is that you again? And two of the servants are trying to open the champagne crates. One of them comes over with a big old meat cleaver. He's got a big meat cleaver. Yeah, Spanish moss. And he's got a big meat cleaver, and he's trying to open it, and the other fellow says, don't do that, you silly boy. You're going to need to open it with a crowbar. So then they put the meat cleaver down, and we see the camera focus on the meat cleaver. The next minute, it's gone. And then Bruce Dern is back in the aviary. He thinks that, oh, no, what's happening here? Right? Charlotte, is that you? And then next thing we see is the meat cleaver go up in the air, and then whoosh, and whap. And he goes, ah! This is what scared me when I was a kid, right? He goes, ah! Right? And we see the 60s version of the gnarled bones on his arm, and his hand's been cut off. And then we see his head go back, ah, and then a whap, and then I guess his head rolls on the ground, right? So the next we see the party, we this is a black and white film. We cut to the party, and then the doors open, and then in walks this girl with her white dress on, and she's got blood all over it. And the blood obviously symbolizes the fact that she's been defiled and soiled by this married man, but also she's got blood on her dress, blood on the white dress, and so it's over, right? So everybody's in shock and horror at the blood on her. We still don't know what's happened, because we don't know what's happened to Bruce Dern yet. But Big Sam, the dad, he says, come on, Charlotte. Daddy, Papa's got you, right? Come on, Charlotte. And he walks through the crowd. The crowd parts for him. He walks up and he grabs her, and he holds her. And then next thing we see is however many years later, now we're back in like 1964, and we see the great Betty Davis. Now, I talked before about how awesome the lady is that played Laura Palmer in Firewalk with Me, and I think she's like top 10 actress roles of all time. Well, Betty Davis also has got to be in that top 10, because she's so fantastic. I mean, Betty Davis is so great. She is so fantastic. She gives a complex and voluminous performance here where she goes through the whole strata of human emotions. And she is, first of all, we see her and she's lying in bed and we hear this, beep, beep, back it up, boys. And we look outside and we see that George Kennedy's out there with his crew and they got a caterpillar and they're trying to dig a hole in the front lawn, right? So she says, "What? I never." So she stands up and she gets the rifle right beside her bed, and she's in her nightgown. She's an old lady, but she's got her nightgown. She got long hair. Whenever you get old ladies with long hair or pigtails or French braids, it's over, right? Something's wrong, right? This lady is insane. She's Miss Havisham. I was going to say that earlier. A lot of the Southern Gothic literature takes its cue from this kind of Dickensian view of industrial England, right, where we have the old structures juxtaposed against the soot and the grime of the modernist encroachment, the oncoming world, right, the dark satanic mills, as Blake calls it. And in the South, we get the same thing, but instead of the industry, it's like the encroaching industry from the North and the carpetbaggers in the end of the old world. And so that's what happens at the beginning of this movie. And she fires a shot at the caterpillar. "Get off my land!" So she becomes the quintessential "get off my land" woman. But she's living in this genteel property, right? George Kennedy runs up to her and he says, "You almost shot my man." And she says, "I don't care." And basically they have a rule where eminent domain, they are going to join the highway in Louisiana, and there's a bridge that's been built and they need to pave the road right through the house. And apparently they've offered her, compensation for this house, but you're going to build this thing right through this house and this property. I mean, come on. This isn't like urban sprawl. This is like a fantastic, structure. And it's just weird. It's totally believable because of course they would do that. But she says, "I don't care what kind of agreement you came to. I never signed nothing, and I'm the owner of this property," because she has inherited it from Big Sam. Well, we learn through the course of the movie that basically after the events of the murder, she was tried for murder, but because of Big Sam's political influence, her dad's political influence, because he has the governor and all these people at his parties, right? He's a big, big Southern landowner. He's a planter. He's what you call planter, right? That's where you get plantation. He's a Southern planter. And we learned from his influence that they got the trial moved somewhere else and that they didn't prove her guilt, and that basically she's off. But she's lived as a recluse and a Miss Havisham character, right, where she has all the money in the world, but no one wants anything to do with her, and she's locked up inside. And Faulkner talks about this, right? Faulkner, we read the excerpts at the beginning of the stream about how basically characters, they can't live in isolation. The isolation of their family is one thing in this sort of solitude, but when solitude becomes isolation, it makes them crazy, and it makes them draw inward and play into the visions and the ghosts of the past that start to haunt them. And so that's where we cross over, especially into Southern Gothic territory, because she sees visions of Bruce Dern walking through the house and of her father. There's a portion of her father. "Father, what would you have me do? Well, I took care of this property my whole life. Didn't I do like you wanted me to, Daddy? Papa, didn't I do like you wanted me to? I'm not going to let them get into this property. I'm not going to let them build this wall and build this highway right through my house. But aren't you proud of me? Don't you love me? Bruce, is that you? Where'd you come from? Who opened these windows?" Like she's a mad woman. Okay. So anyway, she says that her cousin is coming to the house and she's going to help her. She's going to help her with the property rights. And the cousin that comes is who else? Olivia de Havilland. Beautiful, beautiful Olivia de Havilland. We love Olivia de Havilland. She is a gorgeous woman. Is this just me? It's just me. I look at Olivia de Havilland in this movie and I'm like, this woman is so beautiful. I don't know. Yeah, Olivia de Havilland and early Elizabeth Taylor. I love them. Right? Yeah, you guys ever seen Cleopatra? Even Elizabeth Taylor in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf when she's older. She's this old Spitfire woman yelling at Richard Burton. I'm like, damn, this lady's sexy. Anyway, so she shows up, and there's also a maid. There's a housekeeper there, and the housekeeper, she doesn't trust Olivia de Havilland because as soon as Olivia de Havilland shows up, things start happening where Betty Davis is losing her mind. Like, for instance, one day they're trying to move everything. She basically tells her, there's nothing we can do about this house. And she looks, and there's movers, there's women, they're moving boxes out, and she says, that's my music box. Get your hand off my music box. And in the music box, she thinks she's going to open it, and she's going to see the hand of Bruce Dern in the music box. But instead, it's just, hush, hush, sweet Charlotte, right? So it's a vision, and then, oh, right? It's totally Mad Woman. Then what we find out, okay, so let me skip through this. So what we find out is there's an Englishman who's come to the house, and he's basically, this guy is a true crime live streamer. This guy, this guy has been following this case for a long time, and he meets Betty Davis, and they basically get together. Not really, they don't ever actually get together, but he charms her, and he says, look, I think that you are like the last mysterious woman. And she says, but if I'm mysterious, doesn't that mean that you don't want to find out what really happened? And he says, well, I do want to find out what really happened, but you're still you're still mysterious. You're a beautiful woman, right? And he turns out to be a good guy because he kind of saves her in the end. But what we learn is that Joseph Cotton, when he shows up, another Virginian, Joseph Cotton's from 10 minutes up the road here in Virginia. He and Olivia de Havilland are basically grifters, right? So Olivia de Havilland is the cousin, and she makes a fake head, right, a mask that Joseph Cotton wears, and at one point the head falls down the stairs, and this is meant to, they're gaslighting Betty Davis. They're gaslighting her. They're gang stalking her through the house, and the head that falls down, they're trying to say, there's no head, basically you're crazy for thinking this, but you're also crazy for the way you've been living, but we're going to drive you more crazy, right? We're going to drive you even further insane. And then we find out basically that there's another woman who's given a letter over to the guy, and she says, don't open this until after I'm dead. And so what we find out in the story is that Betty Davis did not attack Bruce Dern. It was actually Bruce Dern's wife who killed him. And the reason that the trial didn't go the way it was supposed to is because this woman didn't want them digging into her life to find out that she was the one who did it. Olivia de Havilland has been bleeding the wife dry of all of her money because she knows that she's got blackmail on the ex-wife. So she's about to do the same with Betty Davis. And then what happens in the end is that the press turns. They were like taking pictures of Betty Davis being crazy looking, and now they turn and they're like, oh, she's actually a genteel woman. So Betty Davis, like, at the end, she gets in the car, she moves out. I guess the house is going to be sold or whatever. But she has her sanity, and she still has all of her money, and Olivia de Havilland and them are caught. So it's an interesting, because it's a Southern Gothic noir, which is really a kind of set theater piece. But it is, you've got Betty Davis eyes. You got Betty Davis eyes, which is like totally insane eyes. But, and I'm not really interested in like the whole Betty Davis, Joan Crawford story. I don't really care about that. But I do know that Betty Davis was similar to Olivia de Havilland's character on the set, or at least that's what they say. And she kind of ruled this thing. But you know what? Whatever, man. She's one of the great actresses of all time. And they made a film. I don't care about the shenanigans that go on in the interplay amongst Hollywood people like that, when they tear each other apart like that. I don't really, that part doesn't interest me. But again, the movie is about the distinction between the old world and the new, the crossover in time and temporal boundaries between the past and the present. Then it moves into the future of Betty Davis, how she will survive in the world. It deals with phantasmagoria and the awful, fantastical elements in a murder. So there's a murder mystery involved. It's a slasher film, right, with the meat cleaver. There's gang stalking and gaslighting, and also the many elements of broken mirrors. There's a part where she goes downstairs. She thinks she's following Bruce Dern, but it's actually just Joseph Cotton, I think, gaslighting her. And she goes downstairs to chase his ghost and ends up smashing all the mirrors in the great room. And of course, this is because she's locked inside of this house like she's locked inside of her psyche. She can't escape from her own memories, and she's breaking mirrors so she doesn't have to see, one, doesn't have to see herself, and two, because mirrors on outer walls function as like portals for demons. Now, that's not specifically in the movie, but that's the way you can read into the movie and analyze it in terms of an esoteric notion, because she's haunted by the demons of her past, and she doesn't even know that she wants to break free. She has to find herself in the labyrinth of her own plantation house. And eventually, that's why eventually she gets in the car at the end of the movie and leaves. She actually exits. So she was an other within herself, but now she's an other outside of the movie. So that's Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. Great movie. I suggest you watch it. That and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. But that song in it, there's a nursery rhyme song because Betty Davis is, again, infantilized. That's why she's an old woman, but she's in her Miss Havisham nightgown with French braid pigtails, because she hasn't been able to grow up, and she's obsessed and programmed by this nursery rhyme music box song. So again, that's a great movie. Let's see, what's another one? Black Snake Moan. Okay, so Black Snake Moan is great because, first of all, it's the Samuel L. Jackson meme. It's the the meme. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. So just briefly, what this one is about is we have Christina Ricci, and she is lovers with Justin Timberlake. It's 2006. It's by Craig Brewer, who, again, is also from Virginia. He did Hustle and Flow. I like that movie. Yes, please, you guys, make sure you like the stream. Share the stream everywhere you can or want to. Add it to your playlists. Rewatch it. Come back for a rewatch later. I know I'm saying a lot of stuff and really fast, but I've got so much content material here with this one stream that I'm trying to make my way through it. And there's just so much. And if you want to support me, you can do that through any of the usual things, right? PayPal, Cash App, Venmo. I will read your super chats at the end. You can also super chat me here. That will get to me sometime. And then you can send me dono chats as well. Dono chat link should be up there. And again, don't forget to come back on Tuesday for Jamie and Thursday for David Patrick Carey, Church of the Eternal Logos. All right, yeah, Hustle and Flow is a solid movie. And the older I get, the more I think Terrence Howard is painted. He's painted. They paint a negative picture of him as being difficult, but I think it's probably a lot of times for good reason. Like in terms of he's difficult purposefully because these people are wild, and he's great in Hustle and Flow. I like that movie a lot. Also because it's Memphis. I lived in Memphis, but so Black Snake Moan is, again, Craig Brewer. He did the film, and Christina Ricci. Basically, she has to say goodbye to Justin Timberlake, who's going off to the military. So he leaves. So then she goes to a party with all these people, and she meets up with a guy who's selling Ease and OxyContin and all this stuff. She takes a bunch of drugs, swallows a bunch of liquor, and she's playing football, like, out on the thing with drunk at a party or whatever in her underwear. She spends almost the entire movie in her underwear. And then she passes out. Well, there's this sinister looking dude at the party who's supposedly friends with her and with her lover, and then he is going to give her a ride home because she's totally wasted. He ends up not being nice to her and dumping her on a dirt road, and then we see Samuel L. Jackson come along, and he picks her up. He's looking around, and he finds this girl, and he picks her up, kind of like what happened with in Cleveland, right? A little bit. Like the guy, he rescues her, right? When you see a pretty little white girl running into the arms of, like, Dad, give away. Dad, give away. You remember that song? Dad, give away. Dad, give away. And we learned that he is being cucked by his wife. He's got an older wife, and they're meeting in a cafe. He's trying to reconcile. He's a church man. He's a church God-fearing man. He's trying to reconcile his own life with his wife, and his wife says that she's leaving him. They meet up in this little cafe, and she causes a scene. She says, I don't love you anymore, right? Okay, well, all right, bitch, not very nice. She's leaving with this other guy, right? And as she's walking out, he grabs her by the arm and he says, you think you're going to get away from this so easy? And she says, don't you put that curse on me, Ricky Bobby. Don't you put that curse on me, Ricky Bobby. Don't you put that evil on me. And then she looks around at all the people in the restaurant and she says, what are you looking at? I don't care about any of these people in this restaurant. So she's a evil, sick, twisted woman. She leaves. She's left Samuel L. Jackson. He goes and talks to his preacher friend. And then he goes back to his house outside, which is, I guess they're in Louisiana. And we see her rose garden, whatever her name was, Regina's Roses, and he rides over it in the Caterpillar, just like in Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. There's always a Caterpillar, always, motorized work vehicles. He rides over them. He crushes the roses, right? Because now he's gotten rid of this beautiful multifoliate beauty that is, this huge, flourishing garden, which is supposed to be the garden of his life, and also his Eden. And she has ruined it. She's crushed it. So he's going to crush that part of his life and he's going to cut it out, right? Yes. So then, where's my treescape? So he's back in his shack, and we see that's not his house, but this is where this kind of thing is set, right? In the sort of tunnels of live oaks and Spanish moss, and a tunnel into the beautiful wilderness. And then we see that he's a musician. He pulls out his guitar and he's singing the blues, right? Well, here we get this sort of fantastical elements because the thunder and lightning is striking and he's playing the blues almost as, you get elements of like, is this Robert Johnson, quasi Robert Johnson, but it's not because he's searching for his soul. And he's trying to, he doesn't lose his faith, but he's searching for his soul. Then when he finds the wayward girl, Christina Ricci, on the ground, he brings her back into the house. She's all messed up. And he hears a word from her, a name. He says, who done this to you? So he goes into town and he meets up with, oh my gosh, who's the rapper in the movie? He goes to get some groceries and some medicine for her. He doesn't take her to the hospital. He's going to fix her up himself. And he goes to get some food and some medicine. He gets some cough syrup. Oh, yeah, David Banner. He meets up with David Banner. So he's going to try and fix her up at home as best he can himself, right? Right, he's the rugged individual. And, yeah, he lives in Carcosa. That's right. And he goes into this pool hall, and David Banner's in there. Damn, David Banner's a big dude. And he says, you ever heard of this girl, Christina Ricci? And he's like, you talking about that bitch from, you talking about that girl? Right? And he's like, yeah, I'm talking about her. He's got his grill. He's got his gold grills. And he says, listen, she's one of my women. Don't go round with her. Right? He's like, and so now we know that David Banner plays a dealer in the movie and a pimp, but he's with a heart of gold and gold grills, and that he is the good guy. He wouldn't have hurt her because he threatened Samuel L. Jackson that he thinks he's going to hurt her. So now we've got a general society filled with, we've got good people around, right? And he couldn't pay for the medicine, by the way, but the lady gave it to him. What's her name? The lady from Law and Order. I ate Thanksgiving with her that year, with the Law and Order cast in New York, at this guy's house, Jesse Martin, the actor. And not my friend, but I mean, we knew each other twice, but he was very friendly. So anyway, So he goes back to the crib, and what he does is he nurses her back to health. But as he's doing this, she dissociates. She continuously gets up and she's chasing after things that aren't there. She's in her dreams. And we find out it's because she is a nymphomaniac. She's not only on drugs and alcohol, but she's addicted to knocking boots. And even in her sweaty, dissociated haze. Yes, thank you, Maddie. Yes, got her name. Yes, that's exactly right. She is even trying to hit on Samuel L. Jackson, and he's like, no. I'm trying. I'm virtuous here. I'm trying to be I'm your saving grace here. I'm your saving angel, right? But he then ends up tying a chain around her, which is weird because we get inverted elements that we get in Southern Gothic. Because when she wakes up out of her fever and her haze, she can't run away. And he says to her, I'm going to cure you of your sin. I'm going to scald this wickedness out of you, and you're not leaving here until you're changed. And that's because he is trying to compensate for what his wife has done, and he thinks he can save her, right? He thinks he can save her. And she says, help, get off of me. But she thinks it's another Cleveland situation. Well, we find out that in the one instance where this is true, and it's not the Cleveland situation, because ordinarily it would be, he is actually trying to save her. And so, long story long, I guess, he ends up saving her. Justin Timberlake comes back. They find out that the other guy did it, and he saves her, and then she gets married to Justin Timberlake, who has severe anxiety or whatever from the military. And then instead of her freaking out when he has anxiety attacks, she stays with him, and in the last scene of the movie, they're in the car going to their honeymoon. He freaks out on the side of the road, but she stays with him, and now they are together, and they are going to create a family. So it's a positive movie in the end. And, of course, it's called Black Snake Moan because he sings this song. And also he's trying to find his voice again through music. So he plays a gig in one of the honky tonks or whatever. And it's got I think Jimbo Mathis did one of the songs in this. Shouts out to Nate out there, my cousin Abigail, because Nate is friends with Jimbo Mathis, and he's a big Southern Delta musician. It's also got samples and overlays of other Delta musicians playing the blues. And so again, we have the kind of swirling, deep folk backdrop of blues music, which provides a voice for the voiceless in the movie, the people who are heartbroken and lost until they find themselves again through love and giving and service, because he serves her and he helps her to get her life back. And she does that through getting married. So it's a classical happy ending. It's actually a classical comedy because there's a wedding at the end of the movie, right? And so everybody gets together, and justice is served, and it's a pretty good movie. Okay. Let's see. We didn't talk about Cape Fear, but Cape Fear is another Southern Gothic. Martin Scorsese. I'll just briefly say this. The 1990 remake of Cape Fear. I remember when this came out, and it was at the movie store. This was the same year that he made Goodfellas. So he made Goodfellas and Cape Fear the same year. It's got Robert Downey Jr. Counselor, come out, wherever you are. This is a remake of the Robert Mitchum movie, which is great. If you haven't seen the Robert Mitchum Cape Fear, it is fantastic, and so is the remake, the version of the movie, and so is the remake by Martin Scorsese with Nick Nolte, and Robert Mitchum is also in this. But this is about your Southern lawyer, right? Of course, Flannery O'Connor was down there from Savannah, and now we got the Southern lawyer down there in Charleston. They're going to go out to Cape Fear. For those that don't know, that aren't Southern, Cape Fear is an actual place, an eastern point in North Carolina. You go through there and pass there on your way to OBX, down to the Outer Banks, which is beautiful territory. And so we have basically a counselor who has put away this creep, played by Robert De Niro, who's got he's got Gnostic tattoos all over him of a cross with scales of justice and, retribution on him, and he thinks he can reform the world through being having retribution and being an avenging angel against what he sees as this false world that he's been locked into in prison, right? His prison planet. And he goes after Nick Nolte hard. This is a big-time stalker movie. It's got the famous scene where they drive out of town and they think they've escaped Robert De Niro, but instead he's holding on to the undercarriage of the car. He's holding on to the chassis, and he follows them, right? And he plays nice, but he is mean as hell. And this is also the scene where he does the G. Gordon. Remember we did a stream on G. Gordon Liddy. He does the G. Gordon Liddy thing where he can hold a lighter until his skin burns to show his will, and he holds a flare in his hands till it burns his hand. He's jacked in the movie, and it's a pretty good movie. But he is a total creep in the movie, going after Juliette Lewis and trying to terrorize the family. But again, the Southern Gothic elements in this mix with noir. So this really is a colorized noir film. The original one is a great noir movie, combined with a stalker movie. So it takes it into kind of an ultra violence. And again, the natural landscape always plays an exterior reflection of the character's inner states. So eventually we end up on a houseboat in the river. They think they're isolated. Their family is isolated, but they're isolated not in solitude, and there's an uneasy calm before the storm. Lightning and thunder strike. Robert De Niro shows up on the houseboat, and eventually he ends up getting killed and drowning in the water swamp or whatever. But it's a very good movie, and it's dangerous because it shows us again that the natural order of things can be subverted, and that people, they are in this Gnostic paradigm where, there will be a reckoning for your sins. And all Nick Nolte's doing is trying to put away this creep, right? But this comes back to haunt him until it doesn't. And yes, Token Study says the family makes the worst decisions. They really do. They really do. They always do. And part of the reason for that is something we've discussed before, which is that people are afraid to make hard decisions and to say no to people because of that fabric that exists with manners in society. Remember we dealt with this on the spooky season stream, right, with Barbarian? And with the movie Fresh. Remember the guy in Fresh? Sebastian Stan even says this in the movie. He says, I took you because people are so afraid to just go with their gut instinct because they don't want to offend someone. And that's where he fills in that little vacuum, right? So First Person Q says, my VHS tape of Cape Fear distorted during De Niro's Max Cady's final rant made it extra intense and creepy. Yeah, that is creepy. Counselor! Come out, wherever you are. Okay, so, let's see. Our last thing that we're going to do here is Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. And I'll say this. I saw the movie a while ago. It's a Clint Eastwood movie, and the movie is atrocious. The movie is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. I know I've said that recently because of Napoleon, but this is on a whole other level. It's the same sort of badness as Napoleon. There's just a lot of like discontinuity in the movie and a lot of incongruous scenes, and like there's a lack of continuity. There's a lack of like, it's all over the place. There's a lack of like human emotions that go in the scenes, and there's what it's trying to do. The movie took a thing that the book does, and they went too far with it, which is that the book, what happens in the book is basically we get this guy who is a nouveau riche character who owns a Mercer House in Savannah, and he is an antique dealer who throws these massive society parties, right? And then, of course, he mentions tomorrow night, the night after the Christmas party, is the gentleman's only party. That's a different party. So it's an Eyes Wide Shut party, right, for creepers or whatever. And he is trying to he basically controls their little world. And again, Savannah is one of the major Southern Gothic locations because it's, as it describes in the book, it is separate. It's hard to get to Savannah. It's not on the main road. People think of Charleston and Savannah as like twin cities or sister cities, but Savannah, it says in the book, Charleston people don't really get to Savannah, and then people in Savannah don't ever go anywhere. So it's all just sort of isolated and by itself, and so everything kind of feeds on itself in the city. And of course, one of the things in the book is elements between the government housing and how it's encroaching on the old society, and it's this uncomfortable balance in which they're living. But it ends up that the people, of course, that seem to be virtuous on the outside, right, but who also constantly make use of their egotistical power are, of course, they're the snake in the garden. They are ruining things from the inside, and they're not afraid to lie, cheat, steal, or kill to get what they want, including when they live openly with their manservant, which is like, oh, there's this boy. Oh, I guess he's in his early 20s, who lives with the main guy who's a bachelor in this house, and he does things for him, like moves furniture and stuff, right? And the guy's clients are like Jackie Onassis, and he is a consultant for classical furniture for like Queen Elizabeth and all this stuff that he constantly name drops in the book. But I just don't see how anybody reading this book could see how it's not obvious that, one, the guy who's doing all the jobs for him and who is a dangerous psychopath renegade who's clearly been traumatized since youth. He says he's living on the streets since he was a little kid, and now he lives with this guy. Well, that guy either caused that from the very beginning, or he's making use of this. I don't see how anybody could not see that they are in a Skittles creeper relationship with each other. And then when the guy ends up being killed, and when he gets shot and killed, it's claimed to be self-defense, but obviously the guy killed him. I don't see how there's any mystery in the book. It seems obvious to me that that's what happened. Maybe I'm not getting it. Maybe that's part of the artwork or the attempted artwork of the book, in that looks can be deceiving and people don't want to face with it. They want to use their manners and keep what they know to themselves, even though behind closed doors they're all gossiping, because that's also part of the sort of ethos of this thing, right? And so we have basically the writer of this, and he says in the end of the book, it's written by this guy, John Berendt, and he says in the end that this is a work of nonfiction. Everything that happened, he says, all the characters in the book are real, but it bears mentioning I have used pseudonyms for a number of them in order to protect their privacy. Though this work is a work of nonfiction, I've taken certain storytelling liberties. So it's a work of nonfiction. So it's true, not necessarily all factual, but so the guy is sent down there by, like, I don't know, Architectural Digest or something to cover Savannah, and he ends up being roped in by Savannah culture and society is part of it, right? And the one thing that annoys me a lot in this is that, hey, thank you, Blazing Koala, really appreciate it. One thing that really annoys me in this is that everything is, well, in Savannah, what we do here in Savannah is, if we have a mint julep at 3, we never have an iced tea at 4. That's uncouth. Well, here in Savannah, people don't park in this parking space. Well, here in Savannah, one must smoke a cigarette at 7 p.m. on the dot. Well, here in Savannah, everything is laid out in Roman cube quadrilangles in the town, and the great hanging moss tree shall not be disturbed after 3. It's like, who cares? Who gives a shit? I don't care. So here's my beef. This is one of those things that, being a Southerner, I'm allowed to say this, being a Southerner, this is one of the things that's always annoyed me, which is that it doesn't matter where you can be fully invested and have a pedigree and part of an aristocracy. You can come from a place, live there your whole life, go to all the same schools as people, go to the same country clubs, do all those things, and yet there is always going to be an element of, oh, well, you see, this is how we do it here. Yeah, I'm aware how we do it. I'm part of the thing. I've known everybody here my whole life. I've always been here. Right? It's like that nobody fits. Everybody's an outsider in some way. That really, really always bothered me. And it usually comes from older people who are trying to maintain some sort of tradition. But it's like you have to have discernment and understand who you're trying to maintain tradition with. I don't understand. I don't understand who they are. Like there are outsider elements, of course. But if that's the case, then direct your thing at them. I don't need to know the rules. I know the rules. I just don't give a shit, or whatever the case may be. Does that make sense? So that's one thing about this that really bothers me, because also people in Savannah, well, Savannaites never go to Charleston, right? Okay, well, do you think the people in Charleston care? They don't care. Right? In fact, what? I'm going to go to Savannah. I mean, look, I'm sure, like, Savannah's beautiful, okay, and it has this rich history and it has all this stuff. But, like, it's like, for one, what? Are you going to compare that to? All these people came from Virginia anyway. You're going to compare that to Virginia? And I'm not trying to say one's better than the other. I'm just saying it annoys me when people compare the thing to the other like they're not fit. And sometimes that may be true. Right. But it just annoys me. Like, this guy he is an outsider. He's coming from New York. He's a writer for a magazine, and he's trying to make his way around the city. But it's like he barely even asks questions, and the people just tell him this stuff. Well, sir, you eating a club sandwich here by yourself, minding your own business? Well, people in Savannah don't do that. And he's like, yeah, I'm a tourist. What? So what? Like, show me how to tell me the good place to go, but don't do it in a condescending way. You know what I mean? I'm not sure I'm expressing myself properly here about this, but it is visible in the book. And in fact, like a third of the book is spent like that. I'm not doing a review of the book. I'm not criticizing how the book is written. I understand why they're doing that way. I'm trying to discuss or deconstruct the reason that they do these things in the book. It's really mind-bending to me. There's Robert De Niro. There's Robert De Niro's eyes, his Gnostic eyes looking out over the sea at the houseboat with the lightning strike. Right. Notice how we have the abyss, right, as his forehead, right? We've got his brain, his mind is the abyss there, and we've got the abyss also between the two mountainous structures on either side. So anyway, so what happens is the book is spent in a murder mystery, and the guy goes down there to write a magazine article, and it ends up learning everything about this guy and his house and his society, but then learning that he has, number one, a fascination with a certain group in the middle of the 20th century in Germany. And he owns all these Lugers, and that's whatever, okay? But the fact is that there's a point made in the story about him owning multiple Lugers, and he says, on the one hand, he says, I never lock my front door, sir. But on the other hand, he says, well, I was just burgled the other night. Okay, so what I'm reading into this is that this guy has eyes wide shut parties with the creme de la creme of Savannah society, bachelor gentleman, dresses up in the black uniform, has a young rent boy, leaves his front door open to invite people to come in because he wants to shoot somebody, and he ends up doing that because he's a complete psychopath. And there's also a distinction in their society, again, because there's the difference between the old money and the nouveau riche. None of these people actually respect him, and that's why he's trying to fight for a place in the hierarchy, which he will never achieve. It's only through superficial means, and it will go away. None of these people they're using him. There's a point made in the book about how there's an old lady who owns one of the big estates, and she orders these wrought iron gates for the front. And, they cost, I don't know, $4,500 or whatever. When they get there, she says, no, these are all wrong. These are totally wrong. And she has them sent back. So now she tears up the bill. She won't pay for them. So then when they get sent back, they have nowhere. These were personalized wrought iron gates. There's nothing they can do with them. So they send them to the scrapyard. So when she finds out they're sent to the scrapyard, she sends her butler over there, who then buys them for scrap, and she ends up paying like $45 for the wrought iron gates instead of the $4,500, and she uses the same gates. So everyone is capable of, making money and doing those things, and that's fine, right? They're trying to, work off one another in a business sense. But the difference is that some people survive and they know how to do it, and the other people, like this guy, he has an insight into it because he's part of it. But Williams, I think his name's Jim Williams, but he will never be able to compete with them. He also, his favorite, this is interesting. This is, again, where Southern Gothic comes into mind. He says he believes in mind control, and there's this favorite game that he's invented that he likes to play, and it's called Psycho Dice, which is basically counting, it's predicting the throw of the dice, because he says there's only a certain number of, the odds are only so much, and there's a certain number of computations you can make. So he plays a game of throwing dice, and that is supposed to be emblematic of the fact that he thinks that through pure will, he can control other people, just like he controls his rent boy, until he controls his entire life. And that he's throwing the dice with his own fate, right? Because this guy's essentially a fatalist. And the way that the book ends is that the writer, who's the speaker in the book, the speaker goes and, first of all, he meets a stunning and brave Autobot Skittles person who takes him, who gives him insight into society, and then who takes him to this witch. And the witch says, basically, she helps him to solve this murder and says that, no, that boy was killed, but he's restless under his grave. So she takes him through the mist and, rolls the bones and puts a mason jar up to his grave and gives him whiskey every night, gives his spirit whiskey until she's like, I can hear laughing. He's down there laughing. He's going to be, they were doing work on the road near his grave, and they put tools on top of his grave, so he's restless where he is. He ain't going to be good until he lay. And that's why he got that avenging spirit on old Jim Williams. So eventually Jim Williams goes to prison, and then when he comes out, he tries to, get his former position, but he ends up dying, I think at age 50, of a heart attack, and he dies right on the spot in his house of where he shot the rent boy. So now, young rent boy, Mark Renton can roam free in the wilderness mists of the Auburn swamps of Louisiana. And that's basically how the book ends. So, again, Southern Gothic, because there's a murder mystery, yes. There's elements of noir. There's high society and low society. There's an uneasy tension between them. There's the manners. There's the good man is hard to find, right? Because these people seem to be on the up and up on the exterior, but they end up being rotten to the core on the inside. The gracious people or the power structure people continue as they always did. And yet some of them, if they fall, their entire world falls, which means that their architecture and their land and their house, their plantation house, will crumble to the ground. And there's an element of the Gnostic and the esoteric in consulting the occult in order to influence future events in a fatalistic paradigm. So that's it. That is the Southern Gothic. Man, I said a lot of words, y'all. So what do you think? Any questions? If you got any questions or comments, you can leave them right here, or you can leave them in the chat afterwards. Let me look at some of the super chats, see if we got any super chats for today. What is this? Okay, yeah, it's Sunday. Hope everybody's going to have a good week this week. let's look at our super chats here. We got we got Real John Connor who sends $20. Thank you so much, Real John Connor. He sends $20 through Cash App. Says for a giant bucket of soup. Thank you so much. I will do that. I will get myself a giant bucket of soup, and I need it. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you, Real John Connor out there. You're a real one. Appreciate you. Real John Connor is also I think he's Ace of Bazed. He's one of the high members here. So if you want to join, if you want to get a membership, think about getting one of those high up memberships because I'm going to be doing something special for them coming up. I'm not sure what yet, but we'll have a fun stream coming up. Also, by the way, we're closing in on 3,000 here, 3,000 subs. So please, please, this week, help me to get over 3,000 subscribers. I want to break that barrier, and hopefully we'll get close to that. I appreciate everybody we got. So thank you so much, and hopefully we can make that next little barrier because then we can have a 3K sub party stream. Okay. So shouts out to Real John Connor out there. Really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Shouts out to, let's see. That's Max. That's from last time. Really appreciate you. Again, thank you to Jonathan out there who sponsored the stream a long time ago, sponsored a stream on these sort of themes and on he had Gone with the Wind listed. So shouts out to Jonathan because that gave me the idea to do this. So thank you so much, Jonathan, for dropping that $100 and doing a sponsored stream. Really appreciate you. Shouts out to Buster who says, "Good to hear about the bodies pulled out of the James." Haha. Who dropped $10 on Venmo. Yeah. So they found like 25 bodies in the James River. And again, I don't know how people. I don't understand how people go out there to have fun or go out there at all and just drown in the James River. It's terrible. God rest their soul, and I hope that they may rest in peace. And I'm sorry that that's terrible. But I can't believe that maybe they meant 25 over the year. Even that, surely it wasn't 25 people all at once, but 25 people over 1 year. What in the world? What is happening? Did they not know how to swim? I hope they did. And I hope that, I don't know what happened. That sounds terrible. I just don't understand that. That's terrible. So, RIP, rest in peace to those people. Let's see. I don't think I got any more there. If you want to support me, you can do that always through PayPal. PayPal link is in the chat, also in the description. You can do that anytime. Any of these links. Let's see if we got any super chats. Let's see here. Let me look at the dono chat first. That might be it for tonight. Hey, shouts out to G Money who drops $10. Says Night of the Hunter and Ellie Kazan's Baby Doll are choice Southern Gothic. Appreciate the content, BLA. Keep it up. Thank you, G Money, for dropping that $10 on dono chat. Really appreciate you, G Money. Yes, thank you so much. Maybe I should do Night of the Hunter sometime in the future because that's a big one. That's a crazy one. That's crazy. Let's see if we got anything else here. 1 second. Don't forget, you can email me afterwards, madmaximalism2x's@gmail.com, and let me know what you want to see done, especially if you're a member. If you're a member, I'm going to listen to you and see your comments and weigh them more heavily. So thank you so much. Thank you to all the memberships. Let's see. Yeah, shouts out to Slow Boy Whiteboard who grabbed a membership, Digital Minefield, Phone Punk. Let's look at super chats. Thank you again so much for Digital Minefield for that $4.99 about the Carson McCullers. Shouts out to Rachel from last time. I thanked Rachel last time, but shouts out to Rachel Wilson. $20 on super chat. Merry Christmas, big hugs. Try to do a stream just for the members every week. So I'll keep that rolling because you guys, I think it's fun. First of all, I think it's fun. I appreciate you, and so I want to do extra work just for you guys. So I thank you so much. And I think that might be it. So again, don't forget to go back and watch the recent streams, right? Recent membership streams. We did Silent Night, Deadly Night this week, which was the antithesis to Home Alone. And again, just one more time, we'll have Jamie Henshaw on Tuesday night. That's 2 nights from now on here to discuss Elvis and Priscilla movie by Sofia Coppola. Go back and watch my Sofia Coppola movie stream. Go back and watch my Elvis Hurt stream called Elvis Hurt. Oh yeah, first person cue, good call. Yo, see, that's why I love that you guys are members, because now I just saw that and I can see it much more easily because you're a member. So thank you, first person cue. Here, Nick's got a special coming out tonight, Year of the Dragon. Yes, of course. Thank you for bringing that up. Tonight, I definitely, as a Nick Mullen, Adam Friedland show, and Seatown enjoyer, will be watching the Nick stand-up special, Year of the Dragon, coming out at 8 o'clock tonight on Adam Friedland show over here on YouTube, because Nick Mullen is my favorite living stand-up. I think he's the greatest stand-up. Nick, Sam Hyde, right? Shane Gillis, Nick Rochford, very funny guys, and I'm especially looking forward to that. So I will definitely be watching that tonight. You hear he wanted it called Year of the Dragon, and they mistook it and they added the to it. Should be Year of the Dragon. Yo, shouts out to who's that? Ortho Boomer Grandma. Thank you so much for that $20. Blessed Nativity soon. Thank you so much for that super chat. $20. That's big. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Yes, we're you guys, we're moving into holy days, right? The holy day. So listen, if you want to see me talk more about that, go back to my to my membership stream. I've discussed that, and I hope everybody is having is out there and safe and warm and happy and having a good time, and is filled with grace and love. Yeah, Maddie says, I'm so hyped for Mullen's new special. Yeah, I'm definitely hyped for it. And so again, just to recap, tonight we have covered so much. We covered William Faulkner, Wild Palms. Y'all, this is a lot. I mean, we covered a lot of stuff here. I'm constantly reading this book, and Western Canon by Harold Bloom. So those don't really count as reading this week, even though I spent a lot of time rereading the essays. But I read Faulkner's ABSALOM, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil for you guys. The Eudora Welty short story, A Worn Path, Flannery O'Connor, Everything That Rises Must Converge. Reread parts of William Faulkner's Old Man, because I just had already streamed on this and done that, but went back to parts of it. Let's see, Ambrose Bierce and Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. Cape Fear, the movie. We didn't really talk about Poe except for House of Usher. The movie Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. The Gift. Let's see, Cold Mountain. Black Snake Moan. True Detective. And then finally, I'll say this. Really, for the South, we talked about those history books. And for the South, a couple of things here that I think are more insightful and better in one instance in terms of verse would be, I got to read this. I got this in Charleston. I still haven't read it. It's Theologies of Terrain by Tim Conroy, who wrote Prince of Tides, which is, he's a South Carolina writer. But two great poets for the South are Yusef Kumunyaka and Etheridge Knight. So I would read, this is one of my favorite books of verse of the greatest living poet, Yusef Kumunyaka. Dean Kai Dow did a stream on that, but he's from Bogalusa, Louisiana. And then Neon Vernacular, which won the Pulitzer Prize 1994. Vietnam poet, but also Southern. And then Etheridge Knight, who is a Southern Mississippi, Louisiana writer. Etheridge Knight, his book, Essential Etheridge Knight. And then his book, Belly Song. And this one is actually, that one's actually signed. And then he's got one more book here, which is called Born of a Woman. That's Etheridge Knight, great poet. I last read this one in 2008. I've been rereading it since. But he's got a great poem called The Idea of Ancestry, and he's an interesting poet. So he's passed away. He's not alive anymore. But he's one of my favorite American poets. And so check those out. And that's about it. That's all I got, you guys. Thank you so much. Really appreciate y'all. Again, we'll be back Tuesday and Thursday. And to play us out here, here is our friend Rooks G. And this is from his Cyberliminal. So please go and subscribe to all of his stuff, Instagram, SoundCloud, Rooks G, Cyberliminal.